Francisco. This is 95.7 The Game.
Ooh, it's Super Bowl Sunday. A little different than last Super Bowl Sunday. A year ago at this time, we were getting set for the Niners in the Super Bowl, and now Niner fans are getting set for their two mortal enemies playing in the Super Bowl. It's Chiefs and it's Eagles in about 3.5 hours from New Orleans. We've got you covered for the next 3 hours up until 3 o'clock here on 95.7 The Game for a Super Bowl special. Plus, there is some Niner news that we got to get into. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Randy, joined by Jake Hutchinson. We will be joined by Sterling Bennett in moments. He's connecting remotely, have technical issues going on with him right now, but we will hear Sterling's beautiful voice coming up in just a couple of minutes. But Jake, it's good to be with you. It is a happy day. It's a sad day. The Super Bowl, no matter who's playing, is always fun, but it also means the football season has come to an end, and now we enter the long offseason. And about like 6 hours from now, 6.5 hours from now, we enter what is the longest offseason in any North American professional sport.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I think the Niners have a lot to overhaul. Obviously, this Deebo news that we'll get into in a bit. I mean, that's going to be sort of a defining story early. But it's going to come down to, they're working on extensions with Brock Purdy and George Kittle. How quickly do they get those done? And what is their approach in free agency? Do they reevaluate what they value at certain positions? Defensive tackle, interior offensive line. You look at the two teams we're going to watch today. They have built up really incredible offensive lines. Obviously, the Eagles everywhere, the Chiefs in their interior. But these teams have physicality, and that was one thing the Niners lacked. So you see a lot in these teams what the Niners have been missing this year, and we'll see what they sort of reevaluate or if they do that.
I think this is a really good Super Bowl matchup in terms of like a model the Niners can follow. And I think that's specifically about the Eagles, because the Eagles, remember last year, coming off of a Super Bowl appearance, just like the Niners are this past season, the Eagles Super Bowl lost to the Chiefs, and they came back out the next year, obviously began the season amazing, gangbusters. They looked like one of the best teams in the league, although I think you could kind of tell based on the margin of victory in those games, maybe they were a paper tiger, but they had a great record. And then the Niners and Deebo Samuel blew them out in Philly, and things went downhill quickly. They still made the playoffs, but didn't win their division, and they didn't win a playoff game. And you're thinking, oh my God, how do they adjust from here? Where do they go from here? They made some really smart coaching staff hires and changes. They had an incredible draft. And really their last 3 drafts have been amazing. They've loaded up on young talent. And now suddenly they're NFC champions again and are on the doorstep of winning another Super Bowl. It kind of feels like this year that the Niners just had is like the Eagles of last year. And if they have a smart offseason, you could find yourself on the doorstep of winning again, just like the Eagles are today.
Absolutely. I think that's how the Niners absolutely have to view this, right? You look at the Eagles, and they brought in 2 new coordinators. Technically, the 49ers are bringing in 3 with their weird thing with Clay Kubiak. Where the
new offensive coordinator.
Right.
Okay, Kyle.
And then Kyle messed up because they didn't follow the Rooney Rule, and they actually had to interview other candidates. And they're like, wait, we're interviewing guys for that position that doesn't exist, or does it, even though he already said they're hiring him. So they're bringing in new coaches. They got Saleh back. They just brought Saleh's special teams coordinator over for the Jets. So that's a key component. There's a chance you could maybe bring Bobby Slowick back in as an analyst. This is just like a brain drain that they've had for years, and they're bringing familiar faces back. And then you go to the draft. This last year was the best draft the Niners have had, but before
in
that,
a long time.
Yeah. Before that, they were just whiffing. You go back to 2022, and it's Drake Jackson and Ty Davis Price and Danny Gray, and that's just a brutal start to it. And last year, or the year before, it's Jair Brown and Jake Moody and Cam Latu, and those are your first 3 picks.
Yikes.
And then it's the Trey Lance draft and Aaron Banks, and they drafted Aaron Banks over Creed Humphrey, who's playing today and might just be the best center
in his third straight Super Bowl.
Yeah. And now you have to go out and you maybe have to sign a guy like Drew Dahlman, who you're going to have to pay a lot because you just made all of these mistakes. And so it is going to be an offseason of, can they build through the draft? They're going to have to. I think they have 9 or 10 picks. Can they do that? Can they say, all right, we don't have a lot of money to spend, especially depending on how this Deebo thing goes out financially. Like, you got to build through the draft. You got to get that right. But having Saleh back, having some coaches that are at a higher level than Sorensen and Schneider, that does something for you. And I do think you're right. There is a comparison to be made with the Eagles and what they went through, and it just drains you. When you go to the Super Bowl and you whiff and you're emotionally exhausted, and the 49ers, ruined the Eagles last year, the 49ers just didn't have it from day one this season. And I think having a refresh, having guys not have to go through the playoffs when there's not a real chance, that's going to go a long way for this team going into next year.
Yeah, the brain drain that you're talking about for the Eagles is absolutely true, and it's the same for the Niners. I mean, so they went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago now, and then they lost both their coordinators to head coaching jobs. Jonathan Gannon went to the Cardinals, done a pretty decent job through 2 years there, and then Shane Steichen went to become the head coach of the Colts. That hasn't been too great for him, but he's still over there. And then they had the season last year where they're kind of trying to find these stopgap roles or trying to promote from within like the Niners have been doing, and it didn't quite work. And then they went out and they hired some big names, some well-known guys who've had some success in the past. One of them, their offensive coordinator, Moore, who's now going to be the head coach of the Saints after the Super Bowl. And, of course, old Niner friend, defensive coordinator Vic Fangio as the two guys to lead those two units now, and suddenly they take a major step up. Obviously, they get Saquon Barkley. You mentioned the offensive line. It's the best offensive line in football. They have two really good wide receivers in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. They hit on not just their drafts on the defensive side with a couple of defensive backs. By the way, I was sitting in on this very studio with Sterling Bennett a year ago, not quite a year ago, on the draft, and I was begging the Niners to draft Cooper DeJean when they had their first-round pick, and he was still available. They did not. The Eagles get him, and I remember saying, I am going to be so upset if he turns out to be really, really good. And guess what? He's been really, really good in his first year. The other one that they got, the corner, Quinyon Mitchell, has probably been better. Two amazing rookie DBs. And it's no secret how the Eagles have turned it around. It's difficult to do, of course. It's no secret. And that is exactly what the Niners are going to that's the challenge for the Niners this offseason. Do what the Eagles did.
No question about it. I think what's interesting is obviously, the Eagles nailed it. You're talking about the secondary. The Niners actually, they're starting to build something. I don't think Jair Brown is probably the answer there. He just had a really rough season last year, and it's looking like he's a guy that might be overthinking things. But you think about going into this year, you've got Diamador Lenore, you've got Renardo Green, you've got incredible safety in Malik Mustafa. If you add some young pieces there, all of a sudden you've got this incredible young core in the secondary.
And it's a group you can keep around together for a long time.
Exactly. And it's and no one should ever compare the Legion of Boom, but you have to start when you can get a group that's all on the same timeline, it does bring physicality, which is something that gets prioritized in corners because in screen game, if you can't tackle, like Sauce Gardner, incredible cover corner, but the dude can't tackle, and the Niners exposed that. I remember at the start of this year, that's a problem. And so I think physicality is going to be something they prioritize. I know it's very coach-speaky, but you look at the Chiefs front, and they've got Tershawn Wharton and Mike Pennell and Chris Jones and George Karlaftis, just big physical dudes who can actually hold gaps. I think the 49ers have to go back to basics and just say, do we have dudes that are strong, physical, and can hold up in the run game and say, I'm going to maintain my gap, and then everything else gets a lot easier off of that.
Yeah, no doubt. Welcome in. It's 95.7 The Game. That's Jake Hutchinson. I'm Mark Randy. We will hear from Sterling Bennett coming up. We're dealing with a connection issue with him right now. We will get that sorted out, and it will be a three-man show until 3 o'clock. We'll keep this kind of Niners related, and we got to talk about Deebo Samuel. We'll do that in just a second, but we are going to break down this Super Bowl matchup. It's Chiefs and it's Eagles for the second time in 3 years. We'll give out our picks. We'll give out our keys to the game, keys to victory, where these teams have advantages, what's the biggest matchups in this game, and of course, we'll answer any and all of your questions. If you want to give us a call, shoot us a text, 888-957-9570. You can also join our YouTube chat, youtube.com/957thegame, for any and all questions about the Niners, about the Super Bowl. We'll get into all of it, but we got to talk about the news of the day, which is not Super Bowl related at all, Jake. It is Deebo Samuel requesting a trade from the 49ers. Per reports, he asked for the trade. He had the conversation with Kyle Shanahan about it at the exit interview at the end of the regular season, and this is a quote from Deebo Samuel. It was a hard conversation to have with Kyle Shanahan because of the relationship that we have, but I have to do what's best. I'm more than thankful for the Niners giving me the opportunity of a lifetime, but now I think it's best that we find another team. In response to that trade request, the 49ers have given Deebo and his agent, Torrey Dandy, permission to find a trade partner, and I know nothing's a done deal until it actually happens, Jake, but we could have already seen the end of the Deebo Samuel era with the 49ers.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the money is weird, right? So I know going straight to the finances is not the sexiest part of this trade, but I do think it's crucial because this is actually going to define what happens. Like if the 49ers were to trade him right now or anytime, before June 1st, they'd have to eat $31 million, 31 and a half in dead cap space. And that would cost them an additional $16 million than if they just keep him. So you're basically paying like double to get rid of him early. So to me,
and that's not a number that an opposing team can help you with. That's just what's on you.
Because that is all in like option bonuses and other bonus money. And so what happens is another team, if they want to trade for him, another team, he's only going to cost about $1 million. So to any other team that's like maybe interested in that, Deebo's contract is actually pretty appealing. He's only like basically on a minimum contract for anybody who wants to trade him. So I bet that they get, some people that are sniffing around that are interested. I don't know how much teams are going to value him. And what the 49ers have to decide is if somebody gives you like a third round pick, that kind of feels like the best you're going to do for this version of Deebo. If somebody gives you a third round pick, is that worth eating $31 million in dead cap space when you're trying to pay Brock Purdy? His number is going to jump. It's not going to get to $50 million, but it is going to jump. You're going to extend George Kittle, and you've got a lot of other guys. You want to make a move in free agency. If you want to get like a new center, like Drew Dahlman, or you want to get another wide receiver, you need money to do that. And
or any other offensive lineman.
Exactly. And so
a left guard.
Right. And so trading Deebo before June 1st, I don't think is going to be viable. But I think what this does is it sets up Deebo being a post-June 1st cut because the 49ers, he's due like another 16.
So not even a trade.
I think he's going to end up getting cut because a post-June 1st trade is kind of a weird thing where
you're trading him for draft capital, and you want the draft capital to help you now.
Exactly.
And post-June 1st, the draft has already happened.
The draft has already happened. Free agency's already happened. So his value is probably going to be less unless some teams whiff or if they have some injuries and OTAs, which doesn't really happen. So I think what it really sets up is that the 49ers are probably going to post-June 1st cut him, and this allows Deebo to talk to other teams and say, hey, who values me, and get those discussions going.
Gauge the market.
Where he can see what his market is, and the 49ers are going to say, all right, yeah, go out. Go see what your market is. See if anybody wants to come in with a Godfather offer, or see if anybody wants to wait until June 1st, and instead of having to get you on the buyout market, they can actually trade for you and maybe get an extension done. I think that's the other thing that'll interest Deebo is when you talk to these teams, and if you negotiate a trade, you could set it up where, okay, maybe you can get an extension done with the team that wants to trade for you. Again, I just think the way this sets up, like financially, it's not going to be viable for the 49ers to trade him because they're going to have to eat so much dead money.
Yeah, I mean, that does make it really, really difficult. And the 49ers aren't in a position to where they can just say, all right, we can deal with $31 million. I mean, they're kind of in a little bit of a crunch, and they've got a major contract extension coming up for their quarterback. Now, I know they have a lot of cap space from this year that's going to roll over to next year and all that, but you don't just eat $31 million for the benefit of a third or fourth or fifth round pick, or maybe a sixth and a seventh round pick or whatever it ends up being. That does not seem worth it. And the 49ers are generally a team that is going to balance those finances. That does not seem like a smart financial move.
No, it's not. And the other thing is, like, to them, they still could decide to just hang on to Deebo. I mean, the option bonus that he's due is complicated, but a lot of that money is going to be down the line anyway, and the cap's going to go up, and they're going to have more space. So they still might like force Deebo to just play out another year with them and say we don't care, because they, given the fact that we don't know when Ayuk's going to be back, and they've got Pearsall and Juwan Jennings, but outside of that, they have no real answers at wide receiver. So there is still a route, I think, for them to say, okay, Deebo, we haven't found a trade partner that's going to work. It's going to cost us way too much money to trade you early, and we're going to hang on to you unless we find like a post-June 1, trade partner. But I do think they'll want to do right by him and vice versa, which is why I think they can do this thing where they designate it early, they avoid paying him the extra $16 million in option bonuses, and they get rid of him, and he gets to move on, and he's already sort of figured out what his market is beforehand and can kind of figure that out. That's where my gut is. I do think there's still a way for them to hang on to him. It would be interesting to me if they just decide to eat that $31 million and say, all right, we'll take a third round pick. But I I can't fathom a way that they make that calculation.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely. And if you missed it, the news today from the NFL world that has nothing to do with today's Super Bowl, which is about 3.5 hours away from kicking off, Deebo Samuel has requested a trade from the 49ers, and the 49ers have given him and his team permission to go out and try to find a trade partner. But again, as Jake is pointing out, the finances make it difficult. If you got a question, a thought, you can shoot us a text. Give us a call, 888-957-9570. We will hear from Sterling Bennett coming up in a little bit as well. He'll be joining us throughout the rest of the show here on 95.7 The Game. My question is about Deebo Samuel. I feel like he's always going to be his best, or the best of whatever he still is as a 49er. So my thought, or my question to Deebo, or just in general, is why would Deebo want out of here? Because it feels like his best shot at being his best is in the Kyle Shanahan offense that has already done so much for him. And I have a hard time believing that in a different system, he's going to be put in as many positions to succeed as he has as a 49er.
I think that's a completely fair thing to point out, is that Kyle Shanahan has maximized him, and it's going to be hard to find somebody who's going to maximize him in the same way. The thing is, I think the way you look at it, if you're the 49ers, you're going into next season where Deebo at this point, this is going to be harsh, he's barely a wide receiver at this point. His route tree is drags and intermediate crossing routes. This is a guy who he's still dynamic. You know, we were, I think, fairly harsh in criticizing him this season.
Well, it wasn't even very good as a running back this year.
Correct. And the thing about Deebo is yes, things were blocked poorly for him. They made that point. That shows up on tape. Their blocking was abysmal this season, and they missed a lot of key times that could have broken him free. But Deebo was a guy that in every season past, he could make something out of nothing. He was the king of, turning a negative 5-yard run into like the most incredible 2-yard gain you'd ever seen. And he just doesn't have that same, I think, lateral quickness. And maybe that was a 1-year blip, but I didn't see that. And so I think he's still dynamic, especially vertically. You saw on kickoff returns, he still had it. He can still make plays with the ball in his hands, and he can still make plays against defenses that run a lot of zone looks. But against man coverage, especially press man, he's not winning. And that's how the Chiefs dominated the 49ers in the Super Bowl, where the 49ers tried to funnel the ball to Deebo. They targeted him 11 times.
What, 3 catches?
3 catches for 33 yards.
Yeah.
And that tells you all you need to know. They put Trent McDuffie on him, and he clamped Deebo. He clamped him down. And you can watch the tape, and it is glaring, and that was a huge reason that was decided. So I think, like, from Deebo's perspective, I think he's looking at it like, one, he's probably got a sour taste in his mouth from the season. He's worn out his welcome a little bit. He was sort of a diva after that Bears game, saying he's not getting the ball enough. By the way, in total, he had 3 fewer touches this season than he did the year before.
Yeah.
So he had basically the same amount of touches and the same amount of games. He just produced way less. He had, I think, like 80 or 90 fewer rushing yards on 5 more attempts. And then as a receiver, like, he had 222 fewer receiving yards, 4 fewer receiving touchdowns, and 4 fewer rushing touchdowns. This is, again, with roughly the same amount of touches.
Yeah.
And obviously not every touch is equal, and you need great blocking and all that. But he's, like, not the same player, and I think he's got a sour taste in his mouth and probably thinks, all right, maybe I can see if there's an extension out there, if there's something else. Again, he's going to value money, and he's going to value this as being his last real contract. And so I think for him, he's thinking, all right, I'm not going to be the first, second, third, fourth, maybe even the 5th option in this offense anymore, and they're just going to run me into the ground, as well the 49ers probably should, with a guy who's in the last year of his deal, and he might just say, all right, let's just cut ties. It's good for both of us. Let me see if there's somewhere else I can go and have something of a resurgence.
Yeah, interesting. It's our Super Bowl special here on 95.7 The Game, but the breaking news for the Niners, at least, of the day, Deebo Samuel has requested a trade. Breaking news right now is that we have solved Sterling Bennett's connection issues, and he is with us now here on 95.7 The Game. Sterling, welcome. Happy Super Bowl day, although it's not nearly as happy of a Super Bowl day as it was a year ago at this time, but Super Bowl is always a fun day. Good to have you. Deebo Samuel wants out. Sterling, your thoughts?
Well, what happened was I tried to connect, and then I said, you know what? I'm going to get out of here. Get me a trade. I'm done.
That
but
worked
no,
fast.
connection's
Wow.
fine. It felt like it was a century getting this thing booted back up. But when that news came across Twitter at 5 a.m, I was up, and I said, Well, that's different. Deebo Samuel's asking for a trade, ironically, out of the one system you think that can maximize Deebo Samuel the most. And Mark, you already hinted towards that, but I thought, does Deebo Samuel have any leverage here? Like, what's his play? What's his ploy? What are you, a fifth-round pick at best in draft pick compensation for a trade? You got a loaded salary cap dead hit, $31 million this year. Like, you don't have any leverage here, and you have the audacity to say, get me out of town. It's like, seriously? Really, dude? But honestly, I'm kind of happy about it. I have moved on past Deebo Samuel. I've been moved off past Deebo Samuel since that Bears game. You want to make it about yourself? Go get paid again. We'll move on. And he said 2 days ago, I'm going to be in the Super Bowl next year. Not going to be in San Francisco, though. And I'm okay with that.
It suddenly makes a lot more sense that he showed up to the Super Bowl or showed up to New Orleans and all the festivities with an Eagles jersey on. I know he's supporting his boy, A.J. Brown. But if you're dead set on continuing to be a 49er, you don't go anywhere with an Eagles jersey on. So this makes a little bit more sense. We should have seen it a few days ago once we saw Deebo rocking that Philly green.
Yeah, it's something where it's like I get him supporting his guy, but it's not a good look.
No.
Like you're not going to make your fan base happy by doing that. And there's obviously like another component of that picture that, we can talk about or not talk about.
What, you talking about his size?
I will just use a quote from his former coach, Will Muschamp. This is something that I honestly, because I know a lot of jokes have been made about it, but like this is a direct quote from Will Muschamp, who is his coach at South Carolina, to Kyle Shanahan. He said,
this was during the draft process?
This was leading up to the draft process in 2019, and Kyle Shanahan has talked about this openly, and Will Muschamp told Kyle Shanahan, you're going to need to stay on him about his weight in the offseason. And that's what he told him. And after Deebo got the contract, when he wasn't around, like he wasn't in great shape, and he had a lot of injuries, and he had that rough season. And
he mentioned his conditioning as a reason for it.
Correct. Yeah. So just being objective about it and using the quote from his former coach, that's something that you always have a concern about, and that's not exactly inspiring stuff.
So he's Pablo Sandoval.
He's Luka Doncic.
Really good player when he's here. And when he goes elsewhere, the belt's going to break. He'll have bad at bats. The buttons might break off the jersey, too. And he'll say, take me back in 2 years' time. And saying, like, all right, we told you. We told you it wasn't going to end well. But for Deebo, I don't know. Like, when I saw the news, yeah, I was happy to get Pearsall in here, get Jennings in here, draft a receiver, sign a veteran, whatever you do. Like, Deebo Samuel's prime is behind him. He's 29 years old. They're going to be 29 years old this year. He's not worth the price tag he's currently getting. He was awful last year for this team. I get it. Injuries, like you said, Jake, blocking. There were so many contextual things that go into why Deebo Samuel wasn't as good as he has been in previous years. However, my biggest complaint's the attitude stuff. Like, if you're not going to be bought in, you're going to be out there karate chopping Tabor Pepper on the sidelines, telling you to be accountable. Man, I mean, do you not see how bad your play was this year? Like that bothers me the most, and I feel like that was the breaking point for the team. Like, even if Deebo said, I want to be here, I want to be in San Francisco, the odds are he actually did come back, to me, are slim in themselves. I don't think they were going to bring him back anyways, even if he didn't ask for a trade.
Yeah, I think what's really frustrating about this season and the way Deebo's going out is when you think, like, if you actually remember that 2021 season, Deebo was like, he's one of the greatest football players I've ever seen in my entire life. That 2021 season,
you'll never see anything like it again.
It was like lightning in a bottle is an understatement. He was such a phenomenal player. The way he breaks tackles in his prime and in the postseason when he's at his best is unbelievable. Like, he just bounces off. He's also an incredibly underrated contested catch wide receiver. Like, he's so dynamic in such a multitude of ways that, you always knew, like, when the wheels kind of went, they would go pretty quickly and it would be kind of rough. But it's tough for it to be also like an off the field vibe sort of thing. And obviously, like, marriages don't end well. They don't ever end how you want them to. But it's like you want to remember just how incredible Deebo was. And again, I have such a respect for him as a player. But again, at this point in his career, he's a limited wide receiver, and he's a guy who's kind of like a rotational running back gadget player for you. And, like, how much is that really worth in the modern NFL and the way that defenses have played the 49ers? It's not worth that much.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we got plenty more to get into on that and everything Niners. Plus, we got the Super Bowl that we got to actually talk about. We'll do that. It's Chiefs and it's Eagles for the second time in 3 years. Chiefs going for the three-peat, trying to be the first team to ever do that. We'll break down the important matchups, the battles. We'll give out our predictions before we sign off. Also, as it relates to Deebo Samuel, and we'll get more into this on the other side, if the Niners do end up either trading or cutting Deebo, you got to remember, you got Brandon Ayuk, who's not going to be ready, I would imagine, for the beginning of the regular season. Wide receiver suddenly becomes a pretty glaring need. So we'll see how the 49ers address that this offseason as well. We got plenty of time for your calls and your texts. 888-957-9570. It's Sterling Bennett. It's Jake Hutchinson. I'm Mark Randy. We're just getting started. We're with you until 3 o'clock ahead of the Super Bowl today down in New Orleans. It's our Super Bowl special here on 95.7 The Game. Keep it locked. We're back with more next on 95.7 The Game.
Oh, could this vintage store be any cuter?
without a trade partner. I know we have reason to believe that maybe a trade isn't imminent, but maybe a release or a cut is imminent for money reasons for the 49ers. I will say, whether it's a trade, whether it is a release, if Deebo Samuel is not on the Niners next year, guys, and with Brandon Ayuk's injury, suddenly wide receiver becomes like a major need, and there's already so many other holes that this team has to plug this offseason. You're going to have to kind of pick and choose what to prioritize. And if the past is any indicator, Kyle Shanahan has prioritized the wide receiver position, so maybe they do that again this offseason.
You know, that is part of the reason I said there's still a chance he could remain on this roster. Again, Ayuk, you don't know when he's coming back. You've got Pearsall, you've got Jennings, you have no other clear-cut receivers outside of that. You have Chris Conley, which you can hold on, and you brought in like Isaiah Hodgins and Russell Gage and there's a bunch of random veteran receivers out there that you can make a move for. But you don't have like a clear, if you lose Deebo, you don't have like a clear rotation, especially without Ayuk. You've got Pearsall and Jennings, and that's not really going to feel great. You're obviously going to like want to draft somebody if you leave it at that. Also, your running back room, Isaac Orendo avoided the worst case scenario with his knee injury, but you've got him and you've got McCaffrey both coming off knee injuries and really no depth if you lose Jordan Mason behind them, because I think the way the Niners are going to handle that is there's 3 levels of tags, and they'll throw a $3 million tag on him. But if it goes above that, teams can jump over that price tag and sign Jordan Mason. So we'll see how that goes. But Deebo gives you flexibility at receiver and running back. So I still think there is a chance he could return. But I just have a hard time seeing a trade.
Well, that's why you love to have 10 draft picks this year, right? You have the ability to go and get somebody in the 4th round. Maybe Sam Darnold helps you out and he gives you that extra 4th round comp pick this year. There is ways they can rework things. You also have $48 million in cap space. That's before George Kittle's eventual extension. Maybe Fred Warner gets extended as well. So they are going to have the funds and the ability to go replace these guys with some younger, more affordable players. But also, let's not forget, Jacob Cowing's also in that room. And now, I know the impact last year wasn't great.
Come on, Sterling. Come on. We're talking about Jacob Cowing right now.
I mean, hey, all I'm saying is 4.3 speed plays in the NFL. And it's up to your head coach. Oh, it didn't. It didn't at all. But it's up to your head coach to figure things out and get that guy on the field for you. Now, obviously, Cowing's no Deebo Samuel. But I can argue that at this point in time, when you have no idea who's going to be out there for you, Ayuk's injured, Deebo could be gone, you got Jennings, you got Pearsall, you may have to play Jacob Cowing. You may have to rely on him to be something. Now, how big is that something? Could be very small for you, but he got to be something out there for your offense. But also, then you get into conversations of, well, Devontae Adams could be coming over to San Francisco this year. Maybe a little expensive, but there are options in almost every single level. Inside the building, draft picks this year, maybe you spend high again, although that seems unlikely. There are so many options for them where it almost, maybe it's overwhelming how many moves they can make to replace Deebo this year.
Yeah. Let's go out to the phone lines. Nick in Berkeley wants to talk about Deebo Samuel. You can join the conversation, 888-957-9570. We'll take your Deebo calls. We'll take your Niners calls. We'll take your Super Bowl calls. Anything you got, hit us up here on 95.7 The Game. I'm Mark Randy, along with Jake Hutchinson and Sterling Bennett. Out to Nick in Berkeley, who wants to talk about Deebo. Nick, what's up? You're on 95.7 The Game.
Hey, what's up, y'all? I'm just like this, man. Whatever players don't want to be here and they're whining, just get rid of them. We can't have them whining before like we did before last season. It spilled over into the regular season. And if he doesn't want to be here, man, ship him off. I mean, he hasn't finished the season. I don't know how many years. And God bless him for all the great plays and memories he gave us. But you know what, man, go get some Cooper Kupp. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Dude, there's other receivers out there. There's lots of receivers that'll pop up on the free agent market. Probably we have bigger needs for our draft picks, like our O-line and replacing maybe a safety or like a cornerback or something like that. But we need some O-linemen, some big hogs. That can be done, getting some veterans in like free agency. That shouldn't be a big deal. But we got to be aggressively getting these guys, man. We can't let guys slip through the cracks. Even if you got to sign just like 2-year deals and stuff. Because basically, Deebo's always hurt. How many games is he going to be out last season? He decides he wants to show up and play for like the last 3 games of the season or something. Like, come on, man. Everyone saw once we were out of it, all of a sudden he wants to turn on the Jets so he can look good for some teams that might want to possibly pick him up in the offseason. It was quite apparent, and it really pissed off a lot of fans. So I'm like, hey, thanks, Deebo, but you can beat it now, bro, because you know what? Your acting's getting old, man. You know what I'm saying? And you're always hurt, so I don't even know what to say about that. But I'm just like, we can move on, and we need to go get Cooper Kupp and get a couple other cats, man, and like at least 3 or 4 decent receivers, some veterans that can get out there, be an impact right away. And Pearsall looked really good, by the way, in the year he was going off.
Yeah, he did. Thank you, Nick. Pearsall did look good at the end of the year. I think Nick brings up an interesting idea about Deebo, and it's something I wanted to ask you guys. First of all, the veteran wide receiver free agency market, or just the wide receiver free agency market, is a bunch of like big names, but washed guys generally is what it is.
Right. Who's your favorite washed receiver of all time?
Exactly. Cooper Kupp is one of them. He's not a free agent, but he's going to be traded. At least that's the report from down in L.A. Cooper Kupp obviously still a pretty darn good wide receiver, but nowhere near the peak of his powers, much like Deebo Samuel. Do you guys think that Deebo Samuel has, I mean, there's one aspect of this, which is his play, and clearly last year, not as good, and everything Nick is talking about in terms of conditioning and availability, that's a factor here as well. But Deebo has also always been like a steadying force in the locker room and has always been one of the biggest culture guys. And he's the guy, along with Trent, with the boombox coming out of the tunnel every single game. Do you feel like some of the things that have happened over the last maybe year or so, because this is now the second time he's requested a trade, technically going back 3 years when he signed his contract extension. He had, as Sterling alluded to in our last segment, where he put hands on Jake Moody against the Buccaneers. He had the comments saying, quote, not struggling at all, just not getting the ball, after he struggled to even eclipse 100 scrimmage yards over the course of a 4-game stretch. And as you pointed out, Jake, his touches pretty much the same as they had been in years past. Do you feel like he's lost some of the gravity that he had in the locker room, or is this just more so the play that has kind of gotten old?
I think he's a guy that was not a vocal leader, right? And I'm not saying he wasn't a leader. I'm saying he was a guy that led by example. And when you are a guy who's trying to lead by example, you have to produce. You have to produce, and you have to be that catalyst. And so much of what Deebo was is he would bounce off a tackle or take a short play and turn it into something explosive. And when you are sort of being that, leader, but you're just complaining about touches at a time where there are a lot of young guys. There are a lot of guys looking for leadership, like Pearsall and Cowan and all these rookies stepped up during a season that was really tough. And they're saying like, all right, who do we look up to? And everyone's like, yeah, well, you got Fred and you got George and you got Deebo, and they're, and Pearsall's tight with Deebo and he's looking up to him, and Deebo's like complaining about his touches and he's not producing. And this is Pearsall's a guy who got shot, who fought through everything just to play, and is learning the playbook, and you're supposed to be a leader, and you're not really doing that. I do think some of that matters. I think Kyle Shanahan loves Deebo so much that some of that can be a little bit overstated. I do think there's still a ton of love for him within that locker room, but I do think he burned through some goodwill. He burned through some goodwill by not producing and complaining and just sort of like poking the bear without having a weapon at his disposal. So I think that stuff matters. I don't think it would be I don't think it's to the point where they'd be like, oh, there's no chance he's coming back, but it's less appealing than it used to be.
Yeah, Deebo just feels like a player that you look at a declining production, you see him complaining for weeks at a time and distracting from the team. We're trying to find our way to climb out of this hole we were in last year, and obviously it didn't go how they wanted it to, 6-11, but when you're at your worst, you need your captains that have the C on their chest to be the guys saying, get behind me. And if you can't do it by your play, do it by your words. And Deebo wasn't doing either one of those last year. And when you do that, it rubs the coach the wrong way, rubs the GM the wrong way, rubs your quarterback the wrong way. It rubs the young guys in the room the wrong way, because it sets a precedent of, okay, well, if things don't go well for me, I can do that too. And the Niners are trying to kind of, yes, in a way, keep their window open, but also kind of bring in this new culture, bring in this new future of young players, Mustafa, Pearsall, Cowan, Garendo. They want to get younger. The last thing you can have is an older veteran guy that's one of your 8 captains out there complaining on social media, taking shots at the quarterback and his head coach and saying, oh, I didn't do that, and putting hands on teammates. Now, some of that stuff, again, accountability is okay, but you cannot be a bad example for young guys in that room when you're trying to usher in a new era of Niner football. Sign Purdy, bring in the 10 more draft picks this year maybe, had a phenomenal draft class last year. Deebo, in a way, has kind of been pushed out, not on purpose, but his voice is lacking the impact it used to have, and so is his play now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the biggest thing... You're right. I always think back to... I forget which playoff game it was. Was it the Packers game at home last year, or was it the Lions game? When he went down, I think it was the Packers game, the first playoff game, right? Niners were down big at halftime, and Deebo Samuel goes down with an injury, and everyone on the sideline, if you were watching the wide receiver doc on Netflix a year ago now, almost the past offseason, as it kind of rehashed that whole year... And the feeling on the Niners sideline when they realized they were without Deebo and needed to come back and beat the Packers without Deebo, it was like, oh my God, like this might be it for us. Yeah. Like up until that point, there was an incredible amount of belief that they were going to come back and win that game, no problem. And then Deebo goes down and like you lose your heartbeat, kind of.
100%.
But it's more so on the field, I would say, than maybe anything else.
And that's the thing is like it's a different era now, right? Like you go back, he was Jimmy's guy. Like he was a guy where Jimmy is throwing the ball, at most 20 yards.
A lot.
Between the hashes. It's right down the pipe. Deebo is coming over on a crosser. They have that like Yankee concept that they still run where, Ayuk or someone else clears out deep, and then you have somebody come in on a dig over the middle of the field, and then Deebo runs for another 15, 20 yards and does something crazy. And
every once in a while breaks like 8 tackles and gets a touchdown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that's not necessarily their offense anymore, and it's also because defenses have adapted. They've thrown way more press man coverage at him, and Deebo cannot separate from that because he doesn't really run routes. Like he's running really loopy routes, and he can run crossers and drags. I talked about it before, but like he's not a tactician of a route runner. He's not really running routes. He's a guy that, sort of does what you ask, and he does it loopy. And I will say Deebo like helped Pearsall and other guys get, aligned before the snap. I watched that throughout the season, and that's something that he doesn't get credit for. But I watched him do that. I watched him help a lot of guys. But at the same time, it's what he is as a player right now, and he's a limited player. He's not what he once was, and I think moving on, however that sort of mechanizes, it's probably healthy for both sides.
And it's not like we didn't see this coming. Mark, you and I were on draft night. When they picked Pearsall, the instant conversation was, what happens to Ayuk? What happens to Deebo? One of those guys has to go. In a way, when they drafted Pearsall, now maybe it wasn't like this was the plan, but it felt like the plan was to eventually phase Deebo Samuel out. We're going to pay Ayuk $30 million. We're going to draft Pearsall, 2 guys that can primarily beat man coverage. Ayuk is a far better beater of press man coverage. However, Deebo, with Brock Purdy at quarterback, just really doesn't fit the play style. Yes, there are plays that work in Shanahan's system. Obviously, that's still true. However, once Pearsall got picked, we all said, well, there's Deebo's end. After this year, after next year, it's over. It just doesn't fit what they want to do. They saw what happened against Kansas City. We got to be able to beat press man coverage, beat man coverage, get guys to separate every single play. And you saw this year alone. Now, Jawan Jennings is his own guy. He'll make contested catches. He's physical. Pearsall got shot in the chest, was working his way back in late in the season. Deebo can't separate against anybody. And in this era of the NFL, the Niners made it a choice to say, we got to get 2 guys that can do that consistently. Ayuk and Pearsall. Unfortunately, that leaves the victim in Deebo Samuel to be off the team in a year or two. And honestly, it just feels like he's trying to get ahead of this. They're going to trade me eventually. They're going to cut me eventually. If I request the trade, I can get myself out of this situation sooner rather than later. But the writing's been on the wall for almost a year now.
Yeah.
He was not going to be here for the long term once Pearsall got picked anyways.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, I mentioned it before, I think this is a play by him to one. This allows you to talk to other teams and see exactly what the market is before you actually technically get on the market. And if you do somehow figure out a way to get a trade done, you can maybe try and find a team that wants to do an extension with you, or at least see who has interest in that. So I think it's about money for Deebo. And I think when you look at what the Niners did last offseason, their biggest error was not trading one of those 2 guys. Like you could trade Deebo or you could trade Ayuk, but holding on to them and, drafting Pearsall, it felt like overkill, and it was like, all right, this, I guess, kind of makes sense. But at the same time, like, they overvalued their assets. They got offers for Deebo and Ayuk that were both compelling. They got at least a first-rounder for Ayuk, and I know they got something for Deebo, but they really overvalued those guys and asked too much for them. And so they hold on until they've depreciated. And now you got a situation where you might end up just post June 1 cutting him and not getting much for him.
Well, Jake, why don't you, for our listeners who have just joined us, why don't you explain why you feel like a post June 1st cut designation is what's on the table, likely for Deebo, not a trade? Explain the way that this works.
So two things. Deebo has this $15 million option bonus, which is due March 22nd. The new league year starts March 12th. So there's like a 10-day period in between where that doesn't kick in. If the 49ers, were to trade him, they would have to eat $31 million in dead cap, regardless of that option bonus.
Trade him pre-June 1st.
Yes.
Which is generally what you would do because you want draft compensation.
If you want draft compensation, you want to get it before this year's draft, and you can figure out what sort of players are other involved if you want to get a player-based deal, which isn't that common in the NFL. But really, you want the draft pick now because you're going to use it in this year's draft, and that becomes an immediate player. But if you trade Deebo now, you're eating an additional $16 million, where the 49ers are not a team that really has that much. They have got cap space. They carried over a bunch, but with some of the money that they're going to have to give to Purdy in the immediate term and some of the stuff, the way they keep wanting to roll over money going into the future, maybe they say, all right, it's worth it for a third-round pick to trade Deebo. I just don't think eating $31 million to not have him on your team is a really sound way to do it, and maybe they disagree with that. I just think that's too much money, and they'll see that that's too much money to make it worth it because he's probably not going to fetch a first or a second. I think the best you can get for Deebo is a third-round pick, and that's partially because he only costs like $1 million. I don't even know if somebody's going to give you a third-round pick in this year's draft for him.
That's probably pretty optimistic. I would think a third-round pick. I was thinking Sterling more like probably a fifth-round pick would be the return.
What sounds right, and you think about it with the whole post-June 1st stuff, what do they hold on to him? I get the bonuses involved there, and maybe they don't want to eat $15 million and pay him more, but in my mind, you can maybe dwindle down your potential trade partners by waiting after this year's draft, but you also can eat a less dead cap hit by trading him post-June 1st, maybe get a higher draft pick compensation, say maybe that third-round draft pick, albeit probably isn't going to happen, but if there's a team in the draft that wants a guy, doesn't get their guy, they get desperate. Maybe they say, hey, name a team out there, the Packers or somebody else. We have to get a receiver. Okay, well, Deebo's like, I don't want to be here still. Come get me. Come rescue me in San Francisco. That way, maybe there's wiggle room, but I think Jake's right. Like, when it comes down to finances, keeping Deebo on the roster for the entire year doesn't make sense to me, but also cutting him and getting a trade done pre-June 1st also doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, post-June 1st trade it's not common. It's not common to set that up, at least this far out in advance, but it is viable because they'd save $5 million by doing it that way.
That's what they tried to do that with Jimmy.
Yeah.
Garoppolo a couple of seasons
But they
ago.
also overvalued.
Once again,
of course, that was a whole fiasco where he was practicing on a side field in the preseason.
God, that was funny. That was so weird. That was so weird walking out there and Jimmy's just throwing, and we're like, "Is he on the team?" And they're like, you don't see him. You're not allowed to talk to him.
Don't ask questions.
Don't leave him alone. He doesn't exist."
But I think the Niners would like to avoid that awkwardness again.
I don't know if they care about awkwardness. I think Kyle Shanahan has proven he's like, he'll lean into how uncomfortable something is.
At least it's not a contract dispute. They want to avoid that.
Yeah. I think they're just going to do whatever maximizes him as an asset. And I think waiting until after June 1st, the problem is then you have to pay that bonus money. I do think that money, most of that money is going to hit down the line and the years to follow. So you could say, all right, whatever, we're going to deal with that option bonus later. We think we're either going to keep him or we're going to try and trade him post June 1st. Those become the two options because if you don't designate it early, then it's not worth cutting him. So I think they either designate him early as a post June 1st cut and avoid that money, or they say we're going to hold on to him and we're going to see if anybody doesn't get who they want. Like Sterling said in the draft, they don't get who they want, and somebody maybe pays a little price for Deebo because they say, oh, next year's third-round pick for a guy that costs $1 million right now, that's actually kind of enticing to us. And I think that's maybe a viable way to do it. I don't know if they're going to want to lean into that and wait that long to sort of make that decision, but that is a genuine, viable option, even if it is an awkward one.
Interesting. Yeah, Sterling, what do you got?
Well, I do wonder if San Francisco's of the mindset of, look, Deebo wants out, just put him in the corner, make him wait, make him sit, and say, look, We got to extend Brock Purdy. We got to take care of our free agency class. We have to sign our draft picks. We got to extend George Kittle. We have so many other big money things to get done. You table Deebo for the next 3 or 4 months and say, just wait, sit it out. Maybe his mind changes, or at that point in time, it's training camp. Again, like teams get desperate. Like they could essentially tell Deebo, just go wait. Go ahead and sit on your hands in the corner, face the wall, and you're going to wait till we call you with the trade. Because at this point, we're not getting anything done. We have bigger fish to fry.
Well, let me ask you this. I think there is a real possibility that Deebo Samuel not being on the 49ers anymore, even if it leaves the wide receiver room relatively barren, it might be a good thing.
It is.
Because Deebo Samuel has kind of been Kyle Shanahan's crutch at times, and Kyle Shanahan is so madly in love with this dude. And how could you not be after what he did in 2021? I mean, the dude was absolutely amazing. But it's clear to, I think, most people that he is nowhere near as good as he once was. And in fact, the numbers that you laid out, Jake, he was way worse last year than he's ever been on the same amount of touches, essentially. But it doesn't really seem like Kyle Shanahan is calling plays with the idea that Deebo is not who he once was. Deebo Samuel has been given the same amount of touches. How many times do we see him run the ball on 1st and 10 or on 2nd and long with Deebo Samuel? He tries to get to the edge. He can't break a tackle. He's kind of avoiding contact a little bit more than he was in the past. I think the only way for Kyle Shanahan to quit Deebo Samuel, and Deebo Samuel for him has been a bad habit. The only way for Shanahan to quit that bad habit is if you go cold turkey and Deebo Samuel is no longer on the roster anymore. Because as long as Deebo is on the roster, the temptation of Deebo is too strong for Kyle Shanahan to deny.
I couldn't agree more. I think a fundamental theme of this offseason, and it's funny that, like, you know, in the exit meetings, we talked to Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. They're like, everything's on the table, every scheme, and they just waited it out for Saleh, and that was their only plan, and it almost backfired with that situation in Jacksonville.
Jesus.
That, like, some people are defending. It's like, no, they had one option, and they didn't really interview anybody else.
Shout out to that two-faced Liam Cohen, am I right?
Right. They're like, we're going with Saleh or, like, Brandon Staley, and those are our two options. After saying, like, you know, we're going to evaluate whoever it is. But I do think, like, what they talked about in those exit interviews with us, the media, is like, we want to evaluate everything. And maybe that's lip service. I think the way they handled, and I'm not criticizing them for hiring Robert Saleh. Obviously, it's a great hire. Like, they just didn't really open up the search.
They took a big chance.
They took a huge chance, and it worked out. But they didn't really open up the perspective that wide. And I think a crucial part schematically for them, because a lot of what went wrong, yes, it was personnel. I think the roster and the whiffs in the draft really set them back, and they were really aching from having an aging roster and a long Super Bowl run and all that. But I do think that schematically they didn't have answers. Their protections are garbage. They have really bad answers to simulated overload pressures, a lot of what Spagnuolo does to them, and you'll see some of those today. They rarely pick those up. They didn't give Brock Purdy a lot of opportunities against those. And so I do think they need to evolve a little bit. And at the end of the season, when they started to feature Pearsall, who is, you know, an actual wide receiver who can run routes, like, you started to see, like, yeah, they listen, they were still terrible and they lost games, and it didn't matter at that point in the season. It was about developing a rapport, but, like, he can actually play the position of wide receiver, the modern position of wide receiver, in a way that Deebo can't. And that was something coming out of the draft you saw. And I think the point is the evolution going forward, they need to reevaluate, like, what does this offense look like? How are defenses trying to attack us, and how do we evolve past that and have schematic answers? And Deebo is not going to be a guy that helps you find those answers because he is not a man beater wide receiver.
It's time to get uncomfortable, rip the Band-Aid off, and let's have these uncomfortable conversations. How does Kyle Shanahan need to change? Who needs to go? Who needs to stay? And I think Deebo Samuel, like both of you were saying, maybe that first domino to fall to actually make this offense evolve for the first time, maybe since, 2022. It feels like it's been that long.
Yeah, it does. All right, we got to take a quick break. We're 1 hour in. We got 2 more hours left with you here on 95.7 The Game ahead of the Super Bowl in New Orleans. It's Eagles and it's Chiefs. We'll talk more about that matchup here when we come back. What can the Niners learn from these two teams? And also we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this matchup as well. That's Sterling Bennett. That's Jake Hutchinson. I'm Mark Randy. We're back with more coming up next here on 95.7 The Game.
This is Larry Fleck, owner of The Floor Store. Our President's Day sales.
Philadelphia. We are about 2.5 hours away from kickoff down in New Orleans between the Chiefs and the Eagles in the Super Bowl rematch of the matchup from a couple of years ago when the Chiefs won that one. I think we're going to have an entirely different kind of football game this time around than 2 years ago. 2 years ago was that crazy shootout.
Yeah.
I think this game's, if you're making a bet in this game, I tend to lean heavy under.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is a defensive. It's a lot of long drives, not many total drives. I think both teams want to shorten this football game. I'm going on low 20s at the highest, I think, for these two teams.
Meat grinder of a game, just big boys, trench warfare. if you love big boys and a meat grinder, this is your sort of game.
Wow, dude. You sign me up for some big boys and some meat grinders any day of the week.
Damn right. That's what I honestly do think that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a lot of running the football and the Chiefs just like dink and dunking.
Yeah.
Because that's how Mahomes evolved, right? They used to be with Tyreek like taking deep shots and they still search for that big play, but they are so content to take a little dink and dunk, 5 yard, little because that's like cover two. They threw a lot of cover two at the Chiefs, and it took them a while to figure it out. And that was always the thing, is like cover two is like, we're going to give you some underneath stuff, but like you're going to get tired and you're going to like look for a deep shot, and you can beat it if you're like, no, we're actually cool with taking 5 yards all the way down the field. And a lot of teams are impatient, and the Chiefs are just willing, like, we will take whatever you give us, and we're going to make every yard count. And it might be difficult to get those 3 yards, but we're going to take whatever 3 yards you give us. And then obviously the Eagles changing the calculation with the tush push, because if it's 3rd and 5, they're going to run it and take the 3 yards, and then they can tush push even if it's 4th and 2.
Yeah. I think what's really intriguing about this matchup, Jake and Sterling, is what you just laid out. The Chiefs are an offense that just put the ball in Mahomes' hands in the short passing game. They kind of use that as an extension of the running game. Pacheco went out early in the year, and ever since he's come back, they haven't really had much of a run game. Pacheco doesn't seem healthy. We'll see how he is today after 2 weeks off, but he doesn't seem to be anywhere near the runner that he was pre-injury. They are content with running like 15-play drives where they get like 7 yards in the passing game, and they just take whatever the defense gives them. What's intriguing, though, is the Eagles are the best defense in the NFL, probably in general, but they're also the best defense in the NFL at avoiding the explosive plays. But to your point, the Chiefs don't really need the explosive plays, because the Vic Fangio style is, we're not going to let you beat us with those big explosive 20-plus yard plays. If you're going to beat us, it's because you're pinpoint accurate out of the pocket, and you're just going to complete every short throw in the entire game, and you're not going to make a major mistake. The issue is Mahomes will do that over and over and over and over again. He did that to the Bills. I mean, how many times did they convert with a pass deep down the field? It didn't really happen all that often, and it's happened all season. So it's kind of like a strength of the Eagles defense that kind of leads into the Chiefs doing what the Chiefs offense is really comfortable doing already.
One thing I love about this is it's going to be an interior defensive kind of game. Whoever can stop the run first is who I think wins this one. It's Chris Jones. It's everybody out there in Philadelphia who they seemingly have like 9 guys deep on the interior. Jalen Carter, Davis out there. They're getting Brandon Graham back. Like, I think it's an interior defensive kind of game. And if you like smash mouth football, you like them big boys with, up the middle, this is a game for you. You want to get back to that old school style of football. It's going to be a long, grueling first team to 24 may win this one.
It might be a bad product for most of the audience.
I know, like sickos like you're gonna love it.
For absolute sick deranged individuals who are like, man, I cannot wait to see how they utilize their nickels and what Spagnuolo and Vic Fangio do, because like the secondaries are really cool. They've both got like really physical corners that are.
Trent McDuffie move into the slot, you think?
Trent McDuffie, they use him everywhere. He's kind of like, Lenore, where they just put him across the field however they need to use him.
He's been outside most this year, but in the past he's been a slot guy, and I feel like they might move him into the slot to try to take away Devontae Smith.
Definitely. I think what'll be interesting is, the third corner for the Chiefs, if that's Najee Johnson, who's a rookie and had some ups and downs. They have Jalen Watson, who's like secretly been like one of the best press man corners in the league. But that third corner for the Chiefs could be really interesting in how they attack him, because I think this could be like a big Dallas Goedert game. That's a prop a lot of people are liking. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting how these two teams utilize their secondaries and when Spagnuolo dials up those blitzes, because he's going to have some funky ones that are going to. Jalen Hurts is going to get rocked on a key third down in this game, absolutely blind, and there's no chance he's going to avoid it.
If I have to watch Dallas Goedert go off against this Chiefs defense while George Kittle does nothing in 2 appearances against them, I may lose my mind.
You're probably going to lose your mind.
No, I cannot watch that. I'm probably going to lose my mind today.
Let me ask you guys this from a Niner fan's perspective, because I think most of us are probably in agreement watching the championship weekend a couple of weekends ago. We were probably rooting for the Commanders and the Bills because we did not want to see these two teams in the Super Bowl. This is a pretty easy answer for me. I'm curious where your guys' thoughts are. From a Niners perspective, who are you rooting for in this football game? Because you've got mortal enemy in the Chiefs, the team that has beaten you in the Super Bowl twice. You were so close to beating them last year in the Super Bowl, and we don't need to go down that road. Extremely painful. You almost had it, and you couldn't quite close it out. And then you've got the Eagles, who are maybe more like intensely hated for what they represent. You've only really played them in one really big game, and it was the Purdy UCL game, and it's like, okay, whatever. For me, though, I am rooting big time for the Chiefs in this one because I just cannot possibly stand the thought of the Eagles being the team that knocks off Patrick Mahomes. I don't want any team other than the Niners to have that throne, and especially not the Eagles because they would never let anyone live that down. Their fan base, they would hold that over the Niners' head forever that they were the team that finally dethroned Patrick Mahomes. I cannot have that. So I hate that I'm saying this, but go Chiefs.
Sterling, you're a Niners fan. I'm obviously not a fan. If I was a Niners fan, I think I would be staring into the void. I'd be listening to a lot of Pink Floyd and just trying to feel nothing and remind myself life is good outside of this. But it's a pretty bleak matchup for Niners fans. I think the way you'd sort of rationalize the Eagles as the team you root for is that the Niners can be the Eagles, right? The way we talked about where you reload your coaching staff, you reload in the draft, and you've had this season where you miss out on the Super Bowl and your season goes sideways and it doesn't go the way you want, and then you reload and you come back and you beat the Chiefs. If you're the Niners, you'd say, all right, that can be us. So that's the way I think if you're a Niners fan, you can rationalize not rooting for the Eagles, but at least seeing the Chiefs lose. But that also means that the Chiefs are going to come back with more of a vengeance. I don't think that necessarily matters, and I'm not sure the Niners will ever actually beat the Chiefs, but,
If you think I'm not going to be standing in the shower with the water running, playing Pearl Jam and Nirvana, just crying and sobbing, I'm like, I'm not going to watch this game. I can't take it.
Oh, please, you're going to watch.
I'm going to have a mouthful of chicken wings as my father-in-law screams at the TV. I'll watch him over the game if I have to, but I think I'm on the flip side of you, Mark. I don't mind Philadelphia winning this one because they already won in 2018 against Tom Brady. They beat that dynasty. Like, I don't care if they beat Kansas City. Like, as someone that has watched Kansas City beat San Francisco over and over and over again, playoffs, Super Bowl, regular season, doesn't matter. They come in here and they just destroy us every single time and they break our hearts. To see them lose, have a little bit of suffering in their lives, it's like a small glimpse of time. I don't mind that, but then there's a wrinkle of Eagles get Saquon Barkley. That's kind of their Christian McCaffrey. They get things done. Like, does that matter at all? But I think if I had to, I think I wouldn't mind Philadelphia winning this one because I can stomach and swallow them winning compared to Kansas City getting a three-peat again where it's just like, oh, God, the third year in a row I have to deal with this. It's like watching the prime Yankees go back to back to back, and you're like, can the Diamondbacks please stand up somewhere and beat these guys in Game 7?
I grew up on the East Coast as a Jets and Mets fan. So you're really hitting a chord there where this feels like the Patriots all over again to me. And I'm just the Bills, like you go into that Bills game, we all knew it was going to happen. It was a certainty that the Bills were going to lose that game and they would have a chance. And of course, Josh Allen like panic diving and the angle from the sideline, they can't overturn it. It's just that was inevitable that it would go that way. But I want to ask like a fun question. Do you guys know the last time the 49ers beat the Chiefs?
The last time the 49ers beat the Chiefs. So they lost to them each of the last two times in the regular season, including this year.
They lost to him in 2018. Jimmy tore his ACL.
Yep. Oh, yep. True. Okay. And that was Mahomes' rookie year, 2018, or his first year as a starter.
Yeah.
Was Alex Smith the quarterback?
That's correct. Ding, 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 ding.
What year was it, like 2016?
2014.
2014.
October
it's
5th,
like Dwayne
2014. Yeah, brutal. Travis Kelce was still on the Chiefs. You had Colin Kaepernick to Stevie Johnson. Wow, that's good. And
Nice.
Then you had Phil Dawson go absolutely off. You had 5 Phil Dawson field goals.
Wow.
King.
Nothing changes for the
Just a king.
49ers. Still settling for field goals back in 2014 and now in 2024 too. Wow.
But this time we actually miss them, don't make them. So it's kind of different there, Mark.
True.
Can we trade Jake Moody with Deebo Samuel, just package those guys together and get them both out of here?
Yeah,
For
just
Phil Dawson.
those two for
50-year-old
Miles.
Phil Dawson, come on down.
For Myles Garrett, those two. I'm sure
Hey,
the Browns would be interested in that, right?
You toss in a 3rd-round pick, you never know what can happen, Mark. The Browns are crazy.
They are crazy, but they have no interest in Deebo Samuel. I would be absolutely shocked if they were. 888-957-9570. As Niner fans, who are you rooting for in the Super Bowl, the Eagles or the Chiefs? We got a couple of differing opinions here on this one. I think, honestly, Sterling, to kind of go back at what you said, as a Niner fan who has gone through heartbreak against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl twice, I think the Chiefs continuing to win Super Bowls only values or only like increases the value of your losses to them. And if the Eagles were to beat them, it devalues what you did. Like if the Chiefs present themselves as the greatest dynasty in NFL history, and you were the only team that took them to overtime and could have easily beaten them once, if not twice, like that has got to say something about your team as well.
Brother, you're speaking my language. The way what you just said is the value of your losses. That is a beautiful, and I truly mean this sincerely, that is a beautiful losing mentality where you have to just rationalize. You're like, well, we lost
To the best.
We lost to the best.
Yes.
We had a beautiful, beautiful loss, one of the greatest losses of all time. Look at us. Look at us, beautiful, incredible losers. Let us revel in the magnificence of our tragedy.
That is my life as a Niner fan.
It's honestly, it's what you end up doing where you're like, listen, I didn't even want to win. I'm comfortable losing. This is my home. I'm fine in this little cave of losses that I built for myself.
That is exactly how I justified the San Francisco Giants losing to the Cubs in 2016. We didn't actually want to win. Go ahead. It's fine. We lost to the World Series champion, whatever. I feel like, well, yes, I can totally justify that and see that in my head. Like, the Packers, I'm sure, feel that way this year. The Commanders feel that way. Well, if Philadelphia wins the whole thing, we lost to the best team in the entire league. Oh, whatever. That said, do you really want to see Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes hoist another Lombardi trophy? I don't know if I can do it, man.
Oh, I mean, it's not like I'm going to have a tear roll down my face
It's right here.
seeing
One tear.
Mahomes and Kelsey on that podium again. But I think it would sure as hell beat Nick Sirianni giving a Super Bowl acceptance speech. I mean, can we agree
Big
about
Dom
that?
has to make that speech. Big Dom better make that speech.
I'm not entirely sure what Nick Sirianni does as the Eagles head coach. And listen, like he's taken them to 2 Super Bowls. Like he deserves credit.
Doing something right, obviously.
But like, what is it?
He doesn't call plays.
Has anybody actually reported on like what he did? Like he hired the coaches, right? He realized that was a mistake. I guess he's culture, whatever his culture is. I don't
in game. What does he do? Just decide whether they go for it on 4th down or not?
I guess you give him credit for the tush push. I mean, he deserves some credit. I'm just genuinely asking, like, what his day-to-day looks like. Is he just, coming in with Duncan every day and just, making sure everybody's got coffee, everyone's feeling good, checking on the vibes? If that's what he does, he's doing a good job at it. So.
Is he like their Dan Campbell where it's like, look, I don't call plays. I don't call defensive plays. I'm just here for a good time. And if I can make everyone else happy, we're going to have a fun time today.
There is something to be said for that because like amongst the many knocks on Kyle Shanahan is like, special teams. Like he is exasperated and has a clear disdain for special teams where.
Don't ask him about it though.
I mean, do you guys saw that end of season
He's
press
super
conference?
involved in it. Yeah.
I was there when, Tim Kawakami asked Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch about, he asked Kyle about special teams and basically his level of disinterest. And, they asked for an example from Tim and Tim
Shanahan kind of cut him off too. Yeah.
Well, John Lynch cut him off.
You're right.
Because he asked Kyle Shanahan and he goes like, you don't really love special teams. Is that an area you're going to take more interest in? I'm paraphrasing here. And they asked him for an example, and he points out that Kyle said he doesn't watch, kickers when they try out, which is one of many examples, but of course, they latch onto it. And instead of letting Kyle actually answer, John Lynch he just goes off. And,
let me take this one, Kyle.
And Kyle is like rapidly tapping his hand on the counter, and he's like furious. So don't ask Kyle Shanahan about special teams because he will not be happy. But his answers in the past speak to how he values it. So maybe Nick Sirianni, big special teams guy, who knows?
Maybe.
But maybe there is something to just being a head coach who's like looking at the full picture rather than just being, an offensive or a defensive specialist.
Yeah.
The great facilitator. That's all he is. Just puts guys in positions to go out there and lead by example.
This is a Darren Rizzi podcast now.
It'll be interesting with that in mind.
Grant Boyer's in the house right now.
It will be interesting to see how the other example of that you guys brought up, how the Lions look next year after they lose both of their coordinators, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, now taking head coaching jobs elsewhere. So see how Dan Campbell and the Lions, they still, of course, have a ton of offensive talent, but it's similar to how the Eagles fell off 2 years ago after they lost in the Super Bowl. They lose both their coordinators, had a good start to that year, and then really struggled at the end of the season. The slide began by Deebo Samuel and the Niners when they went into the link and absolutely destroyed the Eagles. They did not win another game, I don't believe, the rest of the season. And the Niners are going through something very similar right now. And we could talk about whether we love the hires that they made. And Robert Saleh, of course, is a familiar face and name, and he had a ton of success here. And, of course, you can find a pathway to the defense looking a whole lot better. They also brought in Gus Bradley, more defensive names to kind of beef up that staff. So we can kind of find parallels, and I know, Jake, you and I, while Sterling was going through some of his connectivity issues, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but Sterling, there is like a path between what the Eagles did last year going into this year and maybe what the Niners are trying to aim for in their offseason. And I don't think you can't deny, you look at the Super Bowl matchup this year, the importance of coaching specifically because of what the Eagles did last offseason and how their defense and offense has evolved and how much better it's gotten because of those acquisitions on the coaching staff. And of course, the Chiefs, the best coach team in the NFL with Andy Reid on offense and Steve Spagnuolo on defense. There's no doubt that there is a premium on quality coaches. And I think that's the goal for the 49ers is to try to take some of that responsibility away from Kyle Shanahan, not necessarily because he's not good enough to handle it, but because just the more number of quality minds and voices you have on that coaching staff, the better. And of recent years, the Niners have kind of been devoid of those kinds of guys in the coaching room.
Yeah, I think when you bring Robert Saleh in, who obviously has had plenty of success, it streamlines everything, right? Shanahan's just the offensive guy now. Obviously, he's the head coach. He has his hands in a lot of stuff. Maybe not special teams, but he certainly is, in on the defensive meetings, talking to Robert Saleh. Brant Boyer's now here as their special teams coordinator. Gus Bradley's here. It's almost about how can we collect this hive mind of incredible football coaches and bring them in that have had so much success over decades of experience. And Bradley being the Legion of Boom, a former head coach himself. The Colts the last couple of years. Saleh, obviously, a former head coach with the Jets and in San Francisco. Brant Boyer over a decade plus in New York. I think it's about you had one of the most inexperienced defensive coordinators last year that didn't really know what he was doing, albeit was kind of San Francisco's fault. They wanted Belichick, wanted Spagnuolo, didn't get their guy, and were like, Sorensen, you're the guy. And they were like, okay. He was like, okay, Kyle, I'll do my best. Didn't work out, but I think bringing in all these great minds streamlines everything. Saleh does defense. Boyer does special teams. Kyle gets to be more hands-off, says, look, how can I reshape this offense? And also it gives this coaching staff finally, for the first time since probably DeMeco Ryans, and maybe not even then, a defensive coach that can push back and say, no, Kyle, this is how things can go. No, this is how you're attacking them. And I think one of the most underrated things Saleh did this year, once he got fired, he went to Green Bay as an offensive assistant with LaFleur. He's seeing the game from a different side this past year. And that's only going to help Kyle Shanahan.
That's exactly how they train all of their coaches, right? They start off where they're assistants, and they put them as quality controls, and usually they'll start off on the other side of the ball. That's how Kyle Shanahan started off. He started, I think, with Gruden, with his defense back in Tampa. I think that was his first job, and he started on the defensive side of the ball, and they firmly believe in that because you have to understand the other side of it. And I think something that we maybe didn't talk about enough is the weird hierarchy where because of the nature that they were in the Super Bowl and all the best candidates were lost, when they fired Steve Wilkes, they sort of ended up with Nick Sorensen and went, okay, he knows this system, I guess.
Fingers crossed, hope it works.
But they brought in Brandon Staley, and for the first month, we're all like, so what's your job? Who's really the defensive coordinator here?
What do you even do here?
And we didn't get a bunch of clarity on like how much was Brandon Staley involved. There was always a sense of is this a Brandon Staley shadow government? Is he really running this operation?
Yeah, he's up in the booth and Sorensen's on the sideline, and
right. And there was this desire to like keep things simple, keep things the way they are, which sort of belies that there wasn't a trust in Sorensen, because you gave him a lot of deference because you're like, he wants to keep it simple. He wants to, stick with 4-3 and run cover 3 and be simple and trust, talent. They didn't really have the talent to do a lot of the things that they do with the wide 9 and all that. But like Sorensen wasn't elevating the game. He wasn't really innovating. And you didn't get a sense that they wanted him to try that or really trusted him to do that. And you were like, well, is Brandon Staley the brains behind this, or is there brains behind this operation? So having Saleh and having like a clear, we know who this guy is. We know what he does. We trust him wholeheartedly. That's going to matter a ton, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and it's going to be interesting to see, because there's obviously a lot of differences in terms of the personnel. I think there's a lot of Niner fans out there who just assume the defense is going to go back immediately to that crazy swarming group that it was when Robert Saleh was here last time. But that was an entirely different group, and you don't know what it's going to look like this time. I mean, you got Nick Bosa as a pass rusher, and you don't really know what else you're going to have along the defensive line, at least someone that can consistently get pressure on a quarterback. So this is going to be a brand new challenge for Saleh. I would warn any Niner fans that are expecting it to look immediately like it did back when he was the DC, because it's not always that simple. I think there's good reason to believe it's going to be better than it was last year. And 2 years ago, maybe as well. They were pretty decent at times 2 years ago. But this is an entirely different unit. You've got some of the same pieces, right? You got Nick Bosa and you've got Fred Warner. Maybe you still got Dre Greenlaw, although it's coming off of an Achilles injury, Dre Greenlaw. Other than that, there's not really any other carryover from anyone on the defense.
Yeah, and you think about the continuity this team wants to kind of install. They love having these guys that played with Kyle Shanahan in previous years. When they got brought over, it was like, let's bring over the entire Falcons roster and see what sticks. And part of it did. Tevin Coleman obviously came here and worked out for a year or so. Actually came back after that and went off against Carolina a couple years later. But I think, they tried to get a return to form last year, and they didn't have the coaches to do that. And the personnel was also off. But I think this year, well, yes, it's going to take some time. There's going to be a transition back to Saleh. I do think now that you have the coaching in place, you're going to see a faster transition back to what worked. But you got them 10 draft picks, you got all that money, you got to have to pour back into that defense this offseason to get that thing to work right.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think fundamentally they have to change their perspective. Where a lot of defenses are setting the tone is like an understatement of it. Defenses are setting the terms against the 49ers, and it used to be the 49ers would have these offensive game plans where Shanahan would build everything around setting up to a certain play and attacking defenses and attacking these coverages, and they had such an exacting model, an exacting way to attack them. And it feels like defenses have caught up over the last few years, and with an aggressive press man coverage thrown at the 49ers and the way they pressure the 49ers and defenses like attack the 49ers and stack the box and force them to run up the middle where they don't have the guys to do it. Teams have reset the terms, and the 49ers are playing catch-up as they were all last year, and that has to change this year.
Yeah, we'll see if they are able to catch up this offseason as they head into next year. All right, time for a break here on our Super Bowl special here on 95.7 The Game. Let's dive into this actual matchup, though, that's going down in New Orleans later on today between the Chiefs and the Eagles. We'll talk more about that, plus plenty of time for your calls and your text. If you still want to talk about Deebo or anything Niners related, we can get into that, 888-957-9570. But this matchup, how is it going to be won and lost? Let's get into that. Coming up on the other side, it's Sterling Bennett, Jake Hutchinson, Mark Randy with you. We're back with more on 95.7 The Game right after this.
Italian Philly coach.
I had the worst dream last night. You were in a car crash, and the kids and I were on our own.
Now back to 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back. Super Bowl Sunday here on 95.7 The Game. Mark Randy, Jake Hutchinson, Sterling Bennett with you here. We're with you until 3 o'clock as we inch closer to kickoff of the final NFL game of the year. This is always a bittersweet day, even if your team is in the game or not, because it's the Super Bowl. It's the biggest game on the calendar. It's one of the biggest events every year in America. Yet it also means it's the end of the football season, and we have to deal with an incredibly long offseason. That is what is ahead, but we do have a football game today. For Niner fans, it is definitely not the matchup they were hoping for. Even if the Niners weren't in the game, these were the last two teams I think they wanted to see in the final. It's the Chiefs and it's the Eagles. That game kicking off in about 2 hours from New Orleans. But again, welcome back. It's Grandy, Hutch, and Sterling with you. It is a narrow spread. Chiefs favored by 1.5. The over-under 48.5, guys. We will get our predictions before we get on out of here today before 3 o'clock. When I look at this matchup and you try to parse through how it's going to be won or lost, I think there's one clear, big matchup to keep an eye on when we look at it from more of a macro view. It is just how many yards is Saquon Barkley going to rush for? Because he has been the driving force for their offense all season long, and specifically in the playoffs. The Chiefs, though, led by Steve Spagnuolo, they tend to take away the opposing team's number one option, the way that they make their money. Steve Spagnuolo does a really good job, maybe better than anybody else at limiting it. So that specific matchup, Chiefs defense versus the Eagles run game, specifically Saquon, but you can even throw in Jalen Hurts in there. That's going to be probably the decider in this football game.
I think one of the things that differentiates the Chiefs as not an organization, because they are actually a terrible organization with a terrible owner that doesn't get talked about enough. But from a coaching, from a program perspective, you're talking about Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, everything that they believe in. They're pragmatists, right? And something that you could criticize Shanahan for is sometimes being an idealist, for being well, this play would have worked if this happened and this happened, or if Deebo was the player he once was. It's well, he's not, right? These are things that are no longer reality. And to be a pragmatist, which I think Sean McVay, if you look at the Shanahan tree, he's more on that side of being what is the most logical answer to solving this question? I think Andy Reid and Spagnuolo, they don't even pretend. They're yeah, obviously, the key to this is going to be stopping Saquon Barkley. Let's be logical. Let's do whatever we have to do. And then one of the guys previewing this, Gerald McCoy, defensive tackle for the Buccaneers, was talking about it. You have to be gap sound, and that is an incredibly obvious sort of basic football statement. But if you watch the 49ers this year, you know how much it matters to just have guys that are stout, that when the 49ers scheme and they're shooting up field and being hyper aggressive, and then you have no defensive tackles. And then that lets the other team's offensive linemen attack your linebackers. That's how you get gashed in the run game, especially up the middle. And the Eagles are going to try and do that. They're going to run duo and try and double team and get to the second level and free up Saquon. And again, with the tush push, they can run it on almost 4 straight downs, because they can say, all right, if we got stopped there, Saquon eventually he's going to break one, or we're going to get enough, and we're just going to keep moving the chains, and we're going to wear on this defensive front. So I think that's going to be the battle, is that Eagles offensive line and the Chiefs defensive front, and how stout they can be, and who wears on who. And if you're the Chiefs defensive front and you can actually get some push up front and make the Eagles question that game plan, that can be the defining factor in this game.
And it feels like that's kind of what's going to happen, unfortunately. Spagnuolo is just so good. Reid is so good. Their team is prepared for anything. They have those guys. They are sound in almost every aspect of the game as coaches and obviously players. And this game comes down to trench warfare. Which trenches, which side of the football, inside the trenches, can get this thing done. And, for Saquon, phenomenal season. Offensive player of the year, just incredible. Could have got the MVP and I wouldn't have been mad. I would have said, yep, that makes sense to me. But I hate that I believe in the Chiefs so much, but they're so good at limiting the opposing team's number one option. We watched this team play San Francisco last year and almost make Christian McCaffrey a non-factor at certain points, and especially in that second half. And so I would you get to halftime, and as soon as those second half adjustments are made, I would not be shocked to see Saquon Barkley really not be a factor in this game. I believe in KC's defense that much, and I just really think that Spagnuolo's going to have their guys ready to go.
Yeah, and it could set up a situation where, like, if the Chiefs get the ball first and they run a super long, 12-play drive for a touchdown that takes 10 minutes off the clock, and the Eagles don't have the right offensive possession, and then their offense never actually gets into gear, that's a way that this could go, is the Chiefs could just grind them into a pulp offensively and take and dink and dunk like we talked about, and then the Eagles, their first offensive possession doesn't necessarily go the right way, and then all of a sudden you're sitting on the bench and you're like, all right, I guess we're still committing to the run, right? And the Chiefs are suddenly up 10-0 and wearing on you. I don't necessarily think that's how it's going to go. I believe in the Eagles to go blow for blow, at least for a little bit, until those halftime adjustments and maybe Saquon gets taken out a little bit. But there is a way where the Chiefs just slow this thing down, and when you slow it down, that game actually takes less time when it is slow and you're just running the ball every possession. But I think the Chiefs could go that route and the Eagles not get in gear, and that's a way that Saquon might not get going.
I also think, Sterling, you bring up a good point in terms of the halftime adjustments and how that tends to benefit the Chiefs. I think it's, in a sense, like Kansas City is the kind of team, and they do this on offense and on defense, where they come out not necessarily like vanilla, but they come out in games in the first half, in the first quarter, in their first drives, where they're kind of just like gathering information. They're seeing what the other team is doing, and then they're saying, oh, okay, we can exploit that later on. Oh, you're doing that? Okay, I can break that rule, and it's gonna turn into a big chunk later in the game. So what this Chiefs team does, again, Spagnuolo on defense, but I think Andy Reid is even better at it on offense, not necessarily coming out like balls to the wall in the first half and like kind of going deep in the playbook, but it's like saving your best stuff and then adjusting when the time is right. And that's why you see the Chiefs consistently playing their best in these big games, like in the fourth quarter. And I know, Jake, you and I were talking about this before we got on the air today, like the idea of Mahomes and the Chiefs being like this incredible clutch team. I think a lot of us view like the clutch gene as someone who elevates their play in the biggest moments. I don't think it's someone who elevates their play in the best moments. Being clutch is just not being affected by those pressure points. It's being who you always are, and the Chiefs have this incredible ability to be as good as they always are late in games, and there's almost everybody else out there is affected negatively in those big moments, not the Chiefs.
That's where I was going to go with it. I want to get Sterling's thoughts on this next, but it's like the Chiefs are almost bored out there. Like they've
big deal.
They've been here before. Yeah. All of these guys, for the most part, have been here before. They're pretty unfazed by it. Like they know what to do. They take teams into deep waters. They take themselves into deep waters, and they go, all right, well,
every single game.
And listen, Mahomes and Kelsey sometimes are just not even calling plays. Like genuinely, they just go, all right. Like Kelsey knows how to sit down in a zone or even against man and just say, all right.
He's got free reign to just go find the soft spot.
He's like a quarterback where he knows like what the defensive coverage is doing, and he's looking around and he goes, all right, well, this is open. And Mahomes has that, like, I think the most maddening part about Mahomes, if you are facing him, is the way he's not fast, but he's just quick enough. He's always just quick enough where he looks like one of those like lizards that's like running on water, where you're like, how is he that fast? He's just fast enough where he's just like skittering. He's not like sprinting, but he's just like sort of getting away from you just quick enough and buying just enough time to get a throw off from a weird arm slot, and Kelsey's sitting there. And when you have a team that like is doing that, where they're not even calling, like it's not even the play call, how are you supposed to do that as a defense? You're like, all right, we know what we're doing, what we're trying to cover. But when the guy's he's doing a choice route that's a choice route the entire time, like that's really, really difficult to cover, and it's almost impossible unless you play man. And if you play man, they'll beat you in other ways.
The way we watched Tom Brady, McDaniel, Belichick orchestrate their offense, it was so system heavy where you're like, they just execute it better than anybody else, and you just can't beat it. They have great personnel, Randy Moss, Wes Welker, all those guys out there, Gronk, obviously. The Chiefs are almost like, we don't even need the system. We're just going to go out there and play backyard football. We know how to get open. Obviously, they are calling plays, but they just play so free. And yes, they look so bored. This regular season, it was like, can the Super Bowl just come already? We know we're going to be there. They almost take games like the Golden State Warriors used to take regular season games. Like, we don't care about the first 82. Give us that final 2 minutes. We'll make our bread and butter there. We'll win the game. Everybody gets mad. Oh, the refs gave them the game. No, we're just better than you are. And so I think, like, for the Chiefs, they're going to go out there today. They're going to play this slog first half, keep it close, keep themselves in it. That second half comes along, 6 minutes left. Philadelphia scores a field goal. KC drives down, scores a touchdown. We all put our heads in our hands and say, why? Why once more this year?
I also think the Eagles are, and this is specifically about Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio is the kind of defensive coordinator who's going to like stick to his guns. He's going to do what he does, like almost no matter what. And the Chiefs, and this goes back to what we were just talking about, like the adjustments and the information gathering that they do early in games. The Chiefs could look one way in the first half and entirely different in the second half. You're going to get the same like Eagles plan of attack, at least defensively, as you were going to get. Like you're going to get the same the entire game. Vic Fangio, for better or worse, is kind of going to be the same guy no matter what. Now, to their credit, it's worked amazing this year, probably the best defense in the NFL, and they have insane talent, and they're awesome, and it's been great. But if the Chiefs find a way to exploit it, and they will because it's just what they do, it's going to be there all game because the Chiefs are the team that adjust more than anybody else, and the Eagles, specifically on defense, aren't really one that is capable of doing that. Yeah,
and the Chiefs have seen this. They've faced Vic Fangio defenses before, and they know how they attacked him against Miami. And I'm pretty sure Vic Fangio. I just saw a stat that he's never actually beaten. His defense has never actually beaten a Patrick Mahomes team.
Oh.
Should probably vet that out.
Oh, great.
But like
who has beaten Patrick Mahomes?
Right, they have the answers for a lot of the stuff that Fangio likes to run, and it is pretty sound. And also like. It depends on personnel, and this is the best. Again, the Eagles have the best roster in the NFL, and they had it day one of this season, and these rookies have progressed. And again, I think the back end, they're really impressive. That's going to be a huge part of it is like, sticking with Xavier Worthy and being patient and dealing with these guys on short, intermediate, and not getting sucked in with like eye candy where the Chiefs sometimes just come out with annoying plays where it's motion in 3 different ways, and then Patrick Mahomes is just, running an option. And they will run that one play that they always do where Mahomes is sprinting out and he's pump faking and there's one defender, and the defender has this impossible task, right? Of you can either go at Mahomes, and if you do that, he's going to lob it over you to the one receiver in the flat. And if you don't go for Mahomes, he's just going to run for it. And then that's how they have gashed the Niners over the year.
And if you do go for Mahomes, you're probably going to get called for a penalty.
100%. So it's
How
tough.
special.
It's just impossibly difficult when even if you dial it up perfectly and you have the right personnel, the Chiefs are just going to like buy enough time and do something that's off script, and you can't really account for that. And it's really exhausting if you're a defensive coordinator.
They are the supercomputer. They are like the ultimate AI of the NFL. They adapt to everything you do. You don't have an answer. And when you think you have an answer, they're like, oh, I got a trick up my sleeve. Here's this random play called SpaghettiOs, and it goes for a 75-yard touchdown pass. And you're like, what just happened? Like, are you serious right now? And for Philadelphia, their roster is stacked. Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Darius Slay, their defense is phenomenal. Like, if there is a defense that can at least limit what Kansas City can do offensively, I think it is Philadelphia. However, again, when the going gets tough, when things get tight, when there's 2 minutes left, 1:30 left, and Mahomes has one timeout, and you're like, oh, all they got to do is stop him 4 times and it's over. It's like, yeah, good luck. And they're so prepared for this. They've been here plenty of times. They're bored through 3.5 quarters of football. I do think that if anyone's going to blink, it's an over-emotional Nick Sirianni-led team. They're so emotional. They're yelling at coaches. They're fist fighting on the sidelines. Like, they'll do anything. And KC's calm, cool, and collected. Like, okay, wait till you break. Yeah. We're right there to pick up the pieces.
Let's not forget that like Hurts and AJ Brown were like on really bad terms earlier this year. They were like having it out, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, we're okay now." Like they don't even really like each other. And Hurts, and let's not forget, like Hurts he's a really good quarterback, but like fundamentally, he sometimes forgets how to play the position. Like all of last year, and again, this was with bad coordination, and he's been better this year. Like he was just not playing the position of quarterback. He was always escaping the pocket and trying to buy time, but he's also not that great at throwing on the run.
Even versus the Rams in the playoffs, I mean, he looked pretty darn bad in that game. Now, he was great against the Commanders. Against the Rams,
the Commanders aren't that good. Like the Commanders weren't that good. They like channeled lightning in a bottle, and Jaden Daniels was single-handedly like carrying through them. But they had like one wide receiver. Their defense, like they're running like Bobby Wagner out there, and Bobby Wagner's still got some juice left in the tank, but he's like 34 at this point. Like they didn't, and they I know they picked up Marshawn Lattimore and they had some good pieces. The Commanders were not that good of a team. They should have gotten bludgeoned in that game. And once you get Saquon running, it's like, it's not that hard. I still am not like a firm believer that, and that's kind of going to define it. It's like when they throw some blitzes, and Hurts has been a little bit better against the blitz, but he still struggled against zone blitzes. And you better believe that they're going to dial that up. Spagnuolo is going to dial up blitzes that are going to make him uncomfortable. And I'm not convinced that they have the answers. And I'm also, I know Kellen Moore is getting the job, and he's obviously been an improvement over what they had. I'm not that firm of a believer in Kellen Moore either. So it's just like when you look at both sides, the coaching, the personnel, I just think the Chiefs are going to obviously be more well-prepared. They're going to be unflappable. And I think when you look at like what's going to define it, it's going to be Spagnuolo against Jalen Hurts in that offense. I think the Eagles are much more likely to blink.
Well, I think that on top of your point, Jake, we talk about rematches, right? Oh, San Francisco had the rematch last year. That was a much better Niners offense than the first time those two teams faced off the first time.
No doubt.
And you have Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy's there. You have Brandon Ayuk, who's ascended at that point, albeit you had some banged-up guys like Kittle and Deebo Samuel. That Niners team was different on almost every facet of the game, on defense, new coordinators as well. Whereas this is almost the exact same Eagles team, albeit some different defensive pieces. The offense is the same. And I can argue it's a far worse quarterback than who they faced a couple years ago. He's not the MVP Jalen Hurts anymore. He ain't that guy. And he's not going to go out there and beat you with his arm. He's not going to go out there and take over games. So you talk about coaching, you can simply chalk this game up to who's the better quarterback. Now, maybe it doesn't define the game or determine the game, but there is a large gap in between Mahomes and most people. There's a pretty large, cavernous gap in between Mahomes and Jalen Hurts today.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like first-grade analysis. Oftentimes, games come down to quarterback play and coaching, and it feels like the Chiefs have the advantage in both of those sides. What makes this matchup really interesting and really difficult to pick is because you have those advantages for the Chiefs, and you feel like the Eagles have every other advantage. Like they have the better defense. They have the better weapons on offense. Like by a mile, they have the better weapons on offense. They just don't have the quarterback. And they've got quality coaches, but they don't have Andy Reid. They don't have Steve Spagnuolo. Like Steve Spagnuolo, the last 2 weeks, locked in his bunker, just doing his crazy game plan. Give him 2 weeks to game plan for anybody. I don't care if you're throwing out like the best offense in NFL history. He will find a way to keep you at 24 points.
The most maddening part about Steve Spagnuolo is he's like so nice. Like I ran into him after the Niners lost to the Chiefs this year, and he was like looking for Mooney Ward. He was trying to go to the locker room and talk to him, and
former player,
right?
Chiefs,
and he's like, and by the way, security's like not letting him through. I'm like, this is the greatest defensive coordinator of all time. You should probably know as a security.
He's going to be a Hall of Famer as a coordinator.
Right, but he's like, after this game of just decimating the Niners, he's like trying to sincerely go talk to his former player and be really nice. And he's always, coaches obviously talk really nicely about opposing teams, but Spagnuolo like means it. Like he's that type of guy where he's like
the way he talks about Purdy.
He is, but like that's the thing is like he is both sincerely so nice and also like ruthless,
a psycho.
Like, just is gonna get down to the exact thing that will define what you are as a team, define what player defines you, and he's going to attack you, and he might not remove that player from the equation entirely, but that's not how it works. Like
to be a fly on the wall for their defensive meetings, like in a game like this for the 2 weeks, like what I would pay to be there and just to watch how they attack this.
Dude, not last week, 2 weeks ago when they faced the Bills, like the broadcast, it was insane where the broadcast said they know that Josh Allen, I think, likes to go, was it to the left?
The left side.
Yeah,
the left A gap.
He likes to go to the left. Yeah. And every single time they were ready for it. And the fact that the broadcast was privy to that information and the Bills are like, no, we're going to keep doing that. And they kept getting stuffed on QB sneaks. No one, I mean, you should be doing this as a defensive coordinator, but the fact that he's going to the level of being like, this is how they like to run their QB sneaks, and this is going to be our edge because it's going to be, the margins are going to be that fine. Yeah. And that's what defined it, is psychotic and beautiful. and it should be appreciated.
He's a evil mastermind. He is the Dr. Evil, but he's more competent of the NFL. Like, he just knows what he's doing. He'll put the pinky up and say, come beat me. Like, you're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. Like, I don't care if you have a time machine, you have gold member, like, you ain't getting that $1 million, brother. I have laser beams on my defense, and you're not going to get 5 yards off of me. I got sharks with laser beams on their heads, and you're not getting past them. Like, that's how evil Spagnuolo is. But like you said, nicest guy in the world. What he said about Purdy after beating them in the Super Bowl, it was like, oh, this is the guy. But also he's like, yeah, but I held you guys to 25 points. You lost again. Go and cry in your beer. Sorry. He's that kind of guy.
He is. And like the blitz that he called at the end of the Bills game when the Bills were do or die on that 4th down, the one that Dalton Kincaid should have caught, they only rushed 5. So a 5-man rush. That's hardly a blitz. Like a 5 is the lowest blitz that you can have. And he had 2 free rushers on Josh Allen because he just made it so unique. Nothing the Bills had ever seen. They didn't know what the hell was going on. The Bills also decided to not have anyone in the backfield to help block and protect Josh Allen, which was absolutely brutal. I don't know what was going through their minds there, but that's just an example. In the biggest moment, Spagnuolo throws out something that the opposing team has never seen and manages to get 2 free rushers out of a 5-man blitz. That is unheard of.
Yeah, two things on that. You go back to the Super Bowl. There were 2 protection breakdowns that cost the 49ers. There was one where Spencer Burford just went in the wrong direction. Yeah. And then there was another one that there was like a miscommunication, and both times like Chris Jones basically comes free. But like you go to that blitz in particular where Jalen Watson, the corner, and the detail that I'm talking about. Like Jalen Watson, a lot of times when guys are blitzing, you see them looking. You see them giving cues that, oh, I might come. And they're looking at the quarterback and they're sort of inching forward. Jalen Watson on that play is like lined up where he's staring at his wide receiver and he's selling it. And a lot of teams and a lot of players, they do that thing where they give away that like, oh, he might be going here. No one saw him coming because he's literally looking like he's manned up, like he's about to press his wide receiver. And you know, that's something, that level of detail is something that like most coaches don't have.
Yeah. It's amazing to watch him at work, and we're going to see it again. And I think the extra added level there, and it's much like the Niners Super Bowl last year, is this is a repeat matchup. Not only does Spagnuolo have 2 weeks to prep, but he has the basis of the prep from 2 years ago. And as Sterling laid out, this is a relatively similar offense. I know with Saquon, they've got a different level in the run game, but you still had A.J. Brown, you still had Devontae Smith, you still had Jalen Hurts, you still had Dallas Goedert, and those are the same main factors in the passing game this time around as well. All right, time for a break. We got 1 more hour left here on our Super Bowl preview show here on 95.7 The Game. We'll get into more of this matchup, what it's going to come down to. And again, before we get on out of here today, we will give you our picks for the game as well. That's Jake Hutchinson. That's Sterling Bennett. I'm Mark Randy. We're back with another hour after this on 95.7 The Game.
Get in zone, AutoZone.
Welcome to AutoZone.
Now back to 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back. We're about an hour and a half away from kickoff of the Super Bowl down in New Orleans between the Eagles and the Chiefs, a Niner fan's nightmare. We're here to talk you through it for the next hour on 95.7 The Game. I'm Mark Randy, joined by Jake Hutchinson and Sterling Bennett. We are 90 minutes away, which means we have the inactives officially from this football game. And I know Sterling pointed this out earlier. We can now officially say the Eagles are getting Brandon Graham back for this football game. So one of the best defenses, maybe the best defense and the best defensive line in football, gets their veteran leader, Brandon Graham, back for this football game.
I love that dude, man. He is. Did you see the video of him and Kittle talking? And he's like, and Kittle's like, I hope you just talk trash to me all game. He's like, I will. And he's just like, he's like this sort of, I think people forget, like, you actually need to be a little bit insane to play football.
Or a lot bit insane.
A lot insane. Yeah. Like, when you talk about it, like, when you're drafting guys, you need to try and figure out if they have the crazy. And I'm not saying football players are all crazy people, but in order to play a game where, like, you're doing damage to your body,
bashing your head's in.
Your brain is on the line every single play. Like, you have to have a level of, like, not caring about yourself where, like, Dre Greenlaw, like, he goes into a quote-unquote dark place where he's, like, kind of trying to murder you. And so you need to have an element of that to bring it. And, like, Brandon Graham is a guy that's just been doing this forever where he loves it. Like, he loves the physicality. He loves how dangerous it is, how violent it is. And he brings it every game. And you talk about, like, Deebo's value, like bringing the boombox, the bump backs out, and sort of being that leader on the field for the 49ers. Brandon Graham is absolutely that guy for the Eagles. And I think that's going to be, even if he's, only used rotationally, like, just having him back, his energy is going to be nice for them.
I was going to say, and you made a great point, Jake, like, Deebo and Brandon Graham are those vibes, bring the boom kind of guys. Shout out to the Costco guys out there. But like, you got to have those kind of players, and you hope, like Deebo, I think San Francisco was wishing he would last 13 plus years and be that guy for a decade-long stretch. But, as the time progresses, you got to say goodbye to certain players. But Brandon Graham has been Mr. Steady, Mr. Consistent. He may have a broken leg, a broken arm, torn tendons, whatever. He is doing everything he can to play football. Coming back from IR in this one, and kind of giving Philadelphia an extra boost of energy when they need it most. When things get rough, when you're down against KC late, he's the guy to rally the troops on defense. So we got to get a stop here. Even if he doesn't play much, just the impact he has on the sidelines, off the field, will help these younger defensive players make some big plays for hopefully Philadelphia today.
Yeah, and they have an incredible defensive line. Brandon Graham, but they got Jalen Carter, who's been amazing, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, who's like a name that I don't think a lot of people know, but he's been awesome, especially late in the year, Nolan Smith. And then they got this guy that nobody really had heard of at linebacker, Zach Bond, who's suddenly an all-pro at linebacker.
Also, Oren Burks, who was on the 49ers, is just like having the season of his life.
He's still probably the weak link of that defense, and I would imagine we will see Andy Reid and the Chiefs.
He played pretty well when he had to replace Dre Greenlaw last year, though.
He did. I would imagine we will see the Chiefs try to pick on Oren Burks as much as they possibly can. Nothing against Oren Burks specifically. It's mostly because the Eagles are very, very good everywhere else. Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell, rookies, are playing great. Darius Slay's having a really nice bounce-back year. Reed Blankenship and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they just got dudes all over the place. And it kind of, when I'm thinking of this matchup, specifically the Eagles in general, offensively and defensively, because they also got Saquon, the AP Offensive Player of the Year, and they got two all-pro caliber wide receivers. I know they've had some issues in the passing game this year in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I don't know if you guys are big Marvel guys, if you're into the Infinity War saga, but the way I think of this matchup, and this is kind of Chiefs in general during their run, especially once they got rid of Tyreek Hill, because they have been almost at a talent deficit in a lot of the games that they go up against. Like, I think they are today, certainly. I think they were last year against the 49ers, a talent deficit. I'm just always reminded of the scene in Infinity War where Doctor Strange, right, holds up the one finger. Like, we got one way that we can win this. Just one way out of however many, like, simulations he ran, whatever, like 14 million or whatever it was. And that is, like, the brain trust of Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo in their 2 weeks of prep, finding the one pathway that they can beat this incredibly talented Eagles team. Because, you've got the worst defensive line. Your offensive line is decent, but that defensive line is going to outwork you. They are amazing. They've got an all-pro at linebacker. They've got a great defensive backfield. On offense, again, the all-pros all over the place. The best offensive line in football, the Eagles do. This is a talent deficit, but you've got the masterminds that are leading the way on the other side, and they've identified the one pathway for them to win it, just like they did last year, and they did it by the skin of their teeth. And I think it's going to be something similar this time around as well.
Yeah, and as much as we've talked about, the tactics of Spagnuolo and the innovation of Andy Reid and all that, it's going to come down to the most simple answer, which is big boys. The big boys up front got to be physical. Grinder. Big boys up front got to be physical, and you got to be physical with their receivers. And one thing the Chiefs, I think, do really well on the back end is that they say, all right, we're going to test early how physical the refs are going to let us be. Because usually what happens is refs don't want to just start the game off in the Super Bowl calling flags left and right. And so if you start off super physical and you're grabbing guys and they're not calling flags, what are you going to suddenly start calling that late in the game? And it plays sort of a trick on the refs and everyone's minds. And they did that really well to the Niners, and they do it every year. And there's no game that's more physical than the Super Bowl, and they let you get away with a lot. I think the Chiefs are going to utilize that again.
Well, it happened 2 years ago, right? James Bradbury gets called for holding, sets up KC for a score. I do wonder, though, if that one thing is the tush push. Do we finally see a team in the Chiefs just eliminate the tush push, take away that 3rd and 2, that 4th and 1?
They kind of did it against the Bills.
Right,
no, it's
if
not,
there is
not quite
a team
the tush push, but
that can stop the tush push and almost take it away from Philadelphia, it's Kansas City. They may not have the biggest guys up front. They may not have the best defensive linemen, but they're going to find a way to put, whether it's a linebacker or a safety, in the right place, right time. They're going to time some Troy Polamalu, jump over the offensive line to somehow fool Nelson, Jalen Hurts back 14 yards, and we're like, what just happened? I have no idea. But I do wonder if that one thing is the tush push. Yeah. When Philadelphia makes their bread and butter, they can get this 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 3, and they line up. Can Casey stop it? And I have a feeling that if there is a coaching staff that can put their guys in the right place to do so, it's going to be Spagnuolo.
Or they just get completely ruthless and just go for the Eagles' kneecaps. Like Dan Campbell was talking about, they literally start biting off kneecaps, and you can't run the tush push if you don't have kneecaps.
That's a good point.
Think about that, folks. Just think about that.
No problem.
That's the kind of analysis you come to 95.7 The Game for, no doubt. You guys brought up the refs, Jake, talking about how the Chiefs have the ability to kind of maybe play a mind game with the refs, be extra physical early, and how that affects the rest of the game. There's been a lot of talk about refereeing in general, and I know it was a topic on opening night at the Super Bowl, media night, when they opened things up, I think, on Monday down in New Orleans. And Mahomes fielded questions about it. Travis Kelce fielded questions about it. I imagine every one of the Chiefs fielded questions about it. Where do you guys stand on this whole, I don't know if conspiracy is the right word, but this refs conversation that the Chiefs have been buoyed by not just some positive calls, but by some actual organized thing aimed to support the Kansas City Chiefs?
So I think the idea that it's an organized effort, I think people really overvalue the idea of something being coordinated and forget how hard it is to coordinate anything. You ever tried to plan a trip? You ever tried to plan anything with people? You know how hard people are to plan anything with?
That's a good point.
Humans, we're not good at that. So I think the idea that this is a concerted effort is pretty ridiculous. I do think it's Patrick Mahomes is an established quarterback who's on the path to being the greatest of all time. And when that happens, you get a lot of leeway from referees. You develop a good relationship. I do think he hams it up with them, and he's extremely good at baiting them into calls. And he goes, oh, and he flops. For those of you just listening on audio, I did a flop. Yeah, so glad we got that one out there. Hope that doesn't get clipped. But yeah, I just think he's incredibly good at baiting them. I think he's really smart about it. And I do think the league has made a concerted effort to protect quarterbacks. And the calls, it's not so much that they get an abundance of them. It's that the ones they get are at these crucial junctures where refs are I think scared to make the wrong call. And then it's such a close margin that they don't overturn it. And it's you don't have the ability to overturn these penalties. And so, when it's a close margin and Mahomes, he flops, he sells it really well. Exactly. Thank you, Sterling.
You are totally right. it's not the fact they get 20 calls a game. Just the one call they do get happens to be that back-breaking call for the opposing team or in Casey's favor. Yes, Mahomes hams things up. He does flop. He does things where you're just like, really, dude? But also, I equate it to baseball. You have that 10-year veteran hitter or that 15-year veteran pitcher. Like when Verlander is on the mound for the Giants this year, he's going to get calls that other hitters aren't going to get. He's going to get calls that Tristan Beck won't get this year because he's Justin Verlander. Brady got the calls. Rodgers got the calls. Favre got the calls. Man, like when you're a great established quarterback, you are going to get some favorable calls that tend to lean in your direction. That said, does it make me sick? Yeah. Am I tired as a Niner fan and saying 3rd and 15 where I'm like, Bosa got held. Someone throw the flag, please. Like I can see it with my eyes. Someone call the flag. Let me throw it. Let me be a stripe for a day and I'll throw it every single play. Am I also tired of seeing their right tackle false start like
God?
Lane
And he's
Johnson
terrible. And he's actually Jawan Taylor's. Let me just be clear. He's terrible. He is really bad. And the fact that like they got away with him like jumping on every snap and holding is pretty maddening. But it's like the league is just going to let that stuff go. But yeah, like Jawan Taylor, let's be clear, is terrible. I need to say that.
Which we're going to see which right tackle can false start the most today, Lane Johnson or Jawan Taylor. It's going to be a false start off. We're going to say whoever false starts the most wins, I guess, because again, both these teams are really good, really talented, but they both get away with some things that I'm begging, whoever wins, let this be a clear-cut, you're a victor, refs stay out of it. I don't want to see a James Bradbury holding call. I don't want to see a 3rd and 15.
No contested
Bosa got
elections.
held. No, I mean, jeez. Like, just let these guys go out there and play. Whoever wins, wins. Most talented team out there holds the Lombardi Trophy. And let's not give anybody else, a certain group of people, reason to start go out there and clamoring for some conspiracy theorists out there.
Yeah, I hope the conversation tomorrow is about Mahomes being great and winning a 3rd Lombardi in a row, 4th Lombardi overall, or the Eagles being the team that finally dethroned them, not that it was the refs that let it happen. And Sterling, right as you talked about Bosa being held, the 650 texted in, KC held Bosa for 2 Super Bowls, 4 exclamation points. As far as it relates to the refs, I also think a part of it is every team gets favorable calls. Every team gets calls that go against them. Like just the nature of what happens. This is an extremely difficult game to ref. You're going to get breaks. You're going to have breaks go against you. It's just what happens. I think part of the reason, I'm not denying that Kansas City gets, the positive calls because they do, and maybe they get them more so than anybody else. But what also happens and why it's like in the forefront of our mind all the time is 1, because they play close games, but 2, because they are the team more often than any other team in the NFL that when they get a break, they take advantage of it.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
They always take advantage of it. Like in the AFC Championship game, when Josh Allen tried to get the quarterback sneak on 4th and short, and he probably got the first down, but they called it short and they couldn't overturn it on review. It's also a stupid, rigid rule by the NFL. You think 95% chance that he got the first down, they give him the first down. It doesn't have to be 100%.
Right, like they have no understanding of physics.
Yeah.
Like, where's the ball? Where do you think the ball is?
Just because it's not 100% guaranteed does not mean you can't say he got the first down. In all likelihood, he got the first down. He should have the first down. That's a separate issue. But like that wouldn't have even been a terribly big talking point if Mahomes and the Chiefs don't go down the field and immediately score a touchdown. Like, whenever they get those breaks, and they get them, I'm not denying that, they take advantage. It would not be a story if they got a break and then they punted a 3-and-out the very next moment.
And that's the thing, and that's why a lot of the narratives are tired, because that play only matters because you're assuming, which is the reality, is that the Chiefs are going to take advantage.
They do.
You give them any edge, they will exploit it. And that's why it's like, can we stop giving them an edge is I think the collective frustration. But you also have to appreciate, like, they are incredible. Like, and when you take advantage of that stuff, like how often do the Niners, when they get a chance and they get a call, they're kicking a field goal, baby. They are 10 times out of 10.
They're probably going to miss it.
They are not turning that thing into a touchdown. They are kicking a field goal from 32 yards, and everybody's going to be in pain about it. Also, another thing about Kyle Shanahan, like hating special teams and then being like as reliant as anyone on kickers, just a little paradox there that I find funny.
And the reason why the refs become such a big deal is that margin of error, like Jake said, that one play can change the entire outcome of the game. Last year's Super Bowl, they muff a punt. Boom, Casey scores a touchdown. And you're just like, well, there's that. The game isn't over at that point in time, but you're just like, oh, crap. Like, now we're in the hole, and we got to dig ourselves back out of it. And I think the stat is, with like 2 minutes left on drives to win or tie games, Mahomes is 11-0 in the playoffs. Like, he's literally perfect. And when you give him the opportunities, he's going to take it. They're going to score. Hence why you see these calls with refs or just getting out of your own way as a team. The minute you step on your own shoelaces and you trip over, they're going to score 7 points. You're going to be down 14-7. You're going to lose 23-16, 23-20 because they're just that good. Meanwhile, you have teams like San Francisco, Philadelphia that just have that one back-breaking play where you're like, can we just not, once, can we just not let this happen? But it always happens because Casey's so good at it.
Yeah, they are. I also think what's interesting about this matchup, and Jake, you brought up Kyle Shanahan and reliance on special teams. Part of his reliance on special teams is a general lack of aggressiveness on third down and on fourth down decision-making as well. What I've loved about this postseason is because it is put to the forefront, and I think this is where the NFL is going. It's put to the forefront teams that are aggressive, and they go for it on fourth down incredibly often. The Commanders did it a ton. The Lions, of course, did it a ton. These two teams, they do it a ton. And we can talk about what that means for maybe Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. But on fourth downs, I mean, there's a chance that this could be a game that's like 20-17 or something like that. We still might not see that many punts because these teams are going to be going for it on fourth and shorts.
100%. And I think that's really admirable. And that's one of the biggest frustrations with Kyle Shanahan is like, all right, you're going to be this guy who's built this incredible offense and you're this innovator, which is all true. And yet you hate special teams.
And then fourth and two, let's punt.
And yet, not any fourth down. There are times he's inconsistent. He's inconsistent about his decision-making. It's about like feel and the way things are going. But for the most part, he leans towards conservatism. And you go, you built this thing. Don't you trust this thing to work? Wouldn't you rather trust this thing than your kicker, who you look exasperated with even when he makes it? And yet, time after time, and do you remember like when he talked about Dan Campbell before the Super Bowl? He was like sort of making fun of Dan Campbell, or not before the NFC Championship.
Yeah,
he was like, "Oh, yeah, we think we're going to have an edge, when they don't get it," and it ended up being right. But he was sort of scoffing at Dan Campbell's fourth down approach. And it's like
only because Josh Reynolds dropped a couple of passes.
Exactly. Like that was
not once, but
right.
Twice.
They had so many failures where they should have beaten them, but it's just like an exasperation with the idea of going for it on fourth down when you are an offensive coach who built the offense and put every single piece in it, and you're like, I don't think this is going to work. Let's kick it.
We've talked a lot about how losing Deebo Samuel, trading Deebo Samuel, releasing Deebo Samuel may force Kyle Shanahan to pivot his offensive scheme and what he does offensively. I don't believe this, but I'm fingers crossed hoping it happens. Watching this playoffs may have Kyle Shanahan rethinking his fourth down conversion rate or whatnot. I go back to the NFC Championship game against the Rams. The Kyle Juszczyk 3rd and 1. You don't get it. You're on their 40-yard line, and you don't go for it. And it's like, you can put the game away right here. You can figure this thing out right now. Just erase any possibility of them coming back or going down, scoring a touchdown. You can put this game away. And I get you don't have Christian McCaffrey at that point. You don't have Brock Purdy. You got Jimmy G, Deebo Samuel. You don't have your roster you currently have. But the aggressiveness is where the NFL is going. Yes, there has been some reversion back to what worked with Salah on defense. But on offense, you're kind of begging Kyle. Just be a little open to changing some things. And whether it's special teams or fourth down stuff, like, he's so great. You want to have him be more aggressive because he can be great on fourth downs too. And I'm hoping that changes this year.
Yeah, and I also think there's like a misconception on what the aggressiveness means, because you get to the 4th and 2 or the 4th and 3. Okay, that's one thing. But it's also how you get to the 4th and 2 and the 4th and 3. Because you could have, I think what you laid out earlier, Jake, you could have a 3rd and 5, and you could see both these teams tonight in the Super Bowl run it on 3rd and 5 and get to 4th and 2, and then they go for it on 4th and 2. Like, the aggressiveness isn't necessarily like 3rd and 5, throw to get the first down, which is, of course, a lower percentage play than trying to run for 3 or 4 yards and setting up a 4th and pretty easy to convert. But what Kyle Shanahan will do on the 3rd and 5s is try to throw incomplete, and then you're forced to punt, where if you can just play from a perspective of get 3 or 4 yards, then go for it on 4th down, it makes the 3rd down play call much easier and much more of a high percentage play because you don't feel like you have to get it all on that 3rd down.
It's pretty basic math. Like you go, like there's high school teams that do this where they're undermanned. They're going against much better teams. And what they do philosophically is they say, all right, we're going to go for it on 4th down wherever we are. Every single time, wherever we are on the field, we're going for it on 4th down because you're multiplying how many possessions you get. And when you decide beforehand, basically like, oh, we're going to, if it's anywhere remotely close, we're going for it, it changes how you calculate yardage and what your approach is. Whereas on 3rd down, you're going for a lower percentage play because you're trying to get all of the yardage versus a higher percentage play that might get you less and set you up for a better chance on 4th down. It completely changes your philosophy. And, they talk about numbers and they have different and the 49ers employ some analytics guys, but like it changes how you calculate all that when you say, all right, if it's even close, we're going to go for it. So we're going to set ourselves up where our 4th down is going to be our 3rd down, even though I know that doesn't make sense the way I said it, but it made sense in my head before I was saying it. You know what I mean? Yeah. They're using all 4 downs almost every time, and that just changes the numbers.
But that's like a philosophical how we think of football change.
Right.
Like, could Kyle Shanahan even have that ability to think, how do I circumnavigate or rethink how I believe football should be played? I don't think he can. I don't think Kyle looks in the mirror and says, I might be wrong on this.
It doesn't seem
I don't think he does that whatsoever. Maybe there's a play or two, but overall he's like, you know what? I'm pretty good at my job. He's a big self-confidence guy. A big, get in the mirror and say, you're great. You're a great OC. Meanwhile, everyone out there is running laps around him in regards to how they're thinking of football when it comes to 4th down conversion rates and 3rd down stuff, and almost shortening the field for yourself. You're shortening 1st and 10 becomes 1st and 8 for you simply because you're saying, I got an extra down to play with. Meanwhile, 3rd and 5, pass incomplete, like I said, Mark, punt, and it's like, you're on the 50-yard line, brother. You can go for it there, but that takes a whole deep dive into the psyche of Kyle Shanahan, which I don't think he's willing to do so.
Yeah, I'm with you. We can get more into this on the other side. We've got one more segment left with you. I also think as it relates to Kyle Shanahan and 4th down conversions, the way I always think about it is if my defense is on the field, like I'm a Niner fan and the defense is out there and an opponent has 4th and 2, do I want them to punt or do I want them to go for it? And generally, on 4th and 3 or shorter, if I'm rooting for the defense, I want them to punt because I don't think my defense can stop you from getting 3, 2, or 1 yard. So if it's that's how my gut feels about it. And if that is how my gut feels about it, I'm sure that there's a lot of other people out there who feel the same way. And I would think Kyle Shanahan should lean into that a little bit more. We could talk more about that. We got one more segment left with you. We will get our Super Bowl picks in before we say goodbye, as well as the Chiefs and the Eagles are getting set to do battle from New Orleans. Kickoff is a little more than an hour away. We're with you until 3 o'clock here on 95.7 The Game. It's Hutch, Sterling, and Grandy with you. More coming up after this.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Now back to 95.7 The Game.
Welcome back. We got 30 minutes left with you here on 95.7 The Game as we get ready for the Super Bowl. Kansas City and Philadelphia doing battle in New Orleans. 1 year ago, the Niners were in a much better spot, of course, because they were gearing up to play in the Super Bowl. 1 year from now, they might be gearing up to play in the Super Bowl in their home stadium. That might be kind of fun.
Yeah, what happened in that Super Bowl last year? I don't remember. Do you?
You do not need to.
Hey, you better watch it, Jake. All right.
Sterling and I were in this very studio, and I think we both cried on air.
I was going to say, were there tears shed? There
were tears. Yeah, no doubt.
I believe the fallout was Mark Willard asking, "Is Sterling okay?" He checked in on me afterwards. Was like, "I'm not sure he's okay."
He knew the answer was no.
It was like, I don't think I can collectively say I am okay right now, Willard, but we made it through 1 year ago.
I will say there is something like going through the experience that we have, and I mean we, Sterling and I know, Jake, you're not a Niner fan, going through the experience that we as Niner fans have, not just last year, but just in our lifetime, like a young Niner fan who wasn't alive for the glory days of Montana and Steve Young and Rice and all those guys, only knowing your team to lose in the Super Bowl, the team not even making the playoffs, it's honestly kind of freeing.
Oh, yeah.
And the playoffs have been so, like, emotionally easy. Like, I know that's, like, pretty straightforward to talk about. You would obviously rather have your team be in the playoffs and be involved, even if you knew it was going to end in heartbreak, I think. But not having your team in the playoffs and not having to worry about it, like, the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl when your team is in it, like the worst 2 weeks of the whole year. But like, this felt like it flew by quick for me. Like the 2 weeks from the NFC and AFC championship games to now felt like it happened in the course of a couple of days.
So what you're saying is after feeling pain, feeling nothing feels pretty good.
Exactly. Yes.
I kind of get that. I kind of get it.
We've gone through so much pain, we already feel nothing. We are calloused over here, Jake.
That's what I like to
Our
hear.
hearts are stone.
Well, next year, hopefully, heartbreak returns to the bank.
And maybe we'll get to see it in person because it'll be at Levi's Stadium.
Yeah. I do genuinely think the Niners are in a decent spot. I think the NFC's wide open. I think that the Eagles have a great roster. They're beatable. Like as much as they're incredibly talented, I don't trust Jalen Hurts. I don't really trust Kellen Moore, who they're going to lose anyway. They're going to be tough, but all these teams are wide open. I don't trust the Vikings. I don't trust the Packers, the Rams, or whatever. Like
Lions losing both coordinators.
Yeah, and it's still Jared Goff at the end of the day. Like people seem to forget every single year in the regular season that Jared Goff is Jared Goff. Like he's Jared Goff. Do I need to say his name again?
Hey, he finished what, 5th in the MVP or whatever it was?
Right. He's a great regular season quarterback who, like, when you pressure him, forgets how to play the position of quarterback and has some terrible throws. And when you don't pressure him, he's pretty good.
It's Marin County's own. You better show some respect for Jared Goff.
Seems like a great dude. He's a really solid NFL quarterback.
You better be careful.
He's a really nice guy.
He's a good guy. It's like when your girlfriend's like talking about someone that they don't actually like, but they're like, yeah, she's really nice. You're like, that's the adjective? Oh yeah, she's super nice. And you're like, oh, okay.
You actually hate her, don't you?
Right. No, she's so nice.
Okay. Go ahead, Sterling.
It did kind of sound like you were saying that when you pressure Jared Goff, he forgets how to play the quarterback position. It kind of sounds like Jalen Hurts may have some Jared Goff in him today. Is that what you're saying?
He could. I do think that Spags is going to know how to get to him, even with a great Eagles offensive line. I think he's going to be vulnerable. It depends how he responds to it. If he's able to respond more often than not, then the Eagles have a good chance of winning this game. But if he crumbles in key situations and he throws a bad pick, that might be all Kansas City needs.
Yeah. We'll see how it plays out. We're going to get to our picks here coming up in a little bit before we say goodbye in about 20 minutes. We'll give out game picks. We'll give out MVP picks. I would imagine if it's the Chiefs, we will all pick Patrick Mahomes to win the MVP. We can also give out maybe like a sneaky contributor who's not getting a ton of publicity that we can throw out. But before we get
Carson
to those...
Wentz.
Wow. The revenge game.
The revenge Super Bowl.
Against the Eagles. Before we get to that, like let's talk through how we see the path for these two teams winning. Because for me, for the Chiefs, it's pretty simple. If it's just a close game throughout, like they're going to find a way to win it at the end. If you're the Eagles, you're almost forced to be, and this is this goes back to, I think, some of our conversations about fourth down aggressiveness and Kyle Shanahan really lacking and falling short there. Specifically when you're playing the Chiefs and Mahomes, knowing that if it's a close game, you're probably going to lose, you're almost forced into ultra aggressiveness throughout the course of the entire game because you need to try to build like a 2-score lead. And you have to try to maintain that because if it's a 1-score game in the fourth quarter, you are guaranteed to lose that football game. So the pathway for the Eagles, it has to be in the second half at some point, build that 2-score lead, and then you just hope you can trade scores the rest of the way. Otherwise, if it's close, you're losing.
I'm with you, and I think they need to do some complicated stuff on the back end that might be difficult to communicate, but when Kelsey is freelancing, there's sometimes you can use coverages where responsibilities change depending on where guys end up, and I think they're going to have to be really smart, sticky there. Obviously, the talent's there for the Eagles. If they're able to just stick with Saquon and stay in it, again, that's simultaneously the path that favors the Chiefs as if it stays close. But I just have a hard time imagining either team running away with it. They're both so physical, so talented. It's going to be such a grinder of a game as we talked about. I think Philly just has to hope that Jalen Hurts, when those blitzes come, is able to handle them and is sometimes able to take smart sacks. And just not throw an interception, say, all right.
Fumble it, not try to evade and fumble it.
Right, and not do something stupid. And sometimes that is the best play. And Brock Purdy's had trouble with that at times and sometimes taking worse sacks than he's had to. But if Hurts can play make against some of those pressures, it's going to be really difficult. But if he can handle them well and see the field, actually play the position of quarterback and go through his progressions, they've got a good chance. And I think it might come down to him because I don't think you can shut Saquon down, but you can put a lot of pressure on him and what the Eagles want to do with him.
Oddly enough, it kind of feels like Kansas City's path to winning is simply just playing the game. It's really that simple. For them, they're just that good. You show up and you kick the ball off for the opening kickoff, and it's like, all right, well, it's Casey's game. Let's see what Philadelphia can do. But for Philadelphia, I completely agree with Jake here. It's like, can Jalen Hurts simply just game manage his way to almost letting the offense play out for himself? They have so many offensive weapons where you don't have to force something, I don't think. Yes, you can be aggressive on third down and on fourth down for sure, but I think with Saquon and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and you have Dallas Goedert, you have the pieces to beat Kansas City. The question is can you game manage yourself into a good position to get a lead, and when those third down blitzes come, when those fourth down blitzes come, can you not blink? That's the biggest question to me. And if Jalen Hurts, just a couple times, he can take a few sacks, fine. It's just that one or two play where if he doesn't blink, he can make that check down, make that nice pass for a first down. This could go Philadelphia's way if Hurts can just figure out those third down blitzes.
But then this goes back to what we were talking about an hour ago. What do you trust? Jalen Hurts to be able to do that?
No.
Or Steve Spagnuolo to be able to force him into those mistakes?
No.
You trust Steve Spagnuolo.
That's why you I can't fathom a world in which you don't take the Chiefs in this game. You could love the Eagles, and how are you going to bet against what the Chiefs have? And also, how has Roger Goodell not gotten involved and forced somebody to hire Steve Spagnuolo to at least mix things up? Somebody hire him.
Please force him to be the defensive coordinator of the 49ers, Roger. Please. That would be helpful.
God, the fact that nobody has hired him is crazy, though, right? Have we ever seen this successful of a coordinator show time and time again in Super Bowls he can stop some of the league's best offenses, not get a head coaching job?
Maybe he just doesn't want it anymore. He failed as a head coach in the past, and now he's got this cushy job as the best defensive coordinator maybe in NFL history. And Bill Belichick, a head coach, but also the defensive coordinator there. That's maybe the only argument that somebody else has. But he's winning Super Bowls every single year. I guess you always want to be the top dog and you want to be the head coach, but he's already tried that. It's gone terribly wrong. He's got a pretty good gig right now.
I think he does want another chance because he's obviously proven himself here. It is a sweet gig. It is a sweet gig, but I do think he would want another chance. I do think it's come on, make you guys know the Chiefs are going to be in it every year, and that as long as they have Spagnuolo, and that was the thing. They had a terrible defense, and they still won it. When they beat the Niners the first time, they were laughing because they're we don't even know what we're doing on defense yet. They had all of these random pieces, all these young guys. They're wait till we learn. And now we're at the end game where the defense is the best part of their team, and you're what have we done? What have we allowed to happen? It's like Robert Oppenheimer staring into the sun that he's created. He's like, what have I done to the world? That's what's happened when we let Steve Spagnuolo stay with the Chiefs.
I wouldn't be shocked to see if the Giants fired Daboll next year, if he maybe wants to go back to New York. I really wouldn't be shocked. But that's a whole year away.
Yeah.
I can't believe they didn't fire him, by the way. What a weird organization.
That's the Giants.
I can't believe they signed Daniel Jones to a big deal and let Saquon Barkley walk, but here we are.
Yeah, that's not the best move, I'd say. A hot take. Hot take, not a great move.
Definitely. The Super Bowl is painful. This Super Bowl is painful for Niner fans. It's also painful for Giants fans because they have to watch Saquon Barkley achieve what they wished that he could achieve with the Giants. Okay, let's get to our picks. We'll start with winners. I think we're probably all going to pick the same side on this. I know, Jake, you just said it. I don't see a world in which you could pick against the Chiefs. I'm with you right there. I'll go Kansas City. They win a narrow one because that's what Kansas City does. 23-20 is the final. This is going to be a slow game. Not many drives on either side. Lots of long drive, 12-play, 13-play, 14-play drives, some field goals here and there. Kansas City just makes one or two more big plays than the Eagles do. That's how they win these football games. And Patrick Mahomes is the MVP. 23-20 Kansas City.
I'm going like 27-24. I think there's going to be some field goals kicked, and there's a chance this thing gets to overtime. My favorite players are talking about like random bets.
Yeah.
I like Tershawn Wharton for a sack.
Tershawn Wharton.
All right, get out.
him and former 49er Charles Omenihu, one of those two guys to get a random sack. I like it a lot. So do with that what you will. If you're sick enough to go down that path.
Goodness gracious.
Big boy, Tershawn Wharton. Telling you, watching
big
Tershawn
boys in
Wharton
the trenches getting their kudos is all we're asking for you.
That's right.
I think it's going to be 28-20 Kansas City. I don't see it being too close down the stretch. I know we're kind of hyping that up. Maybe I just want to be a little different here. KC's played so many close games. They've been here so many times. I have a firm belief that Jalen Hurts is not going to be MVP Jalen Hurts in this game. He'll blink a handful of times. I think this will, funny enough, be a more comfortable game for Kansas City, despite how good Philadelphia has been this season. I'll say 28-20, KC wins. How about Justin Reed getting an MVP, maybe 2 picks today?
Whoa. Wow. I love Justin Reed. He's an awesome safety, and should not have let him go to the Chiefs either. But yeah, he's a great player. It's a wild bet, and I kind of respect it.
I think like Jake saying he doesn't see a world in which anyone bets against the Chiefs. I don't see a world in which the Chiefs win and Mahomes doesn't win the MVP because he's Patrick freaking Mahomes. Even if he doesn't have a great game, like he didn't last year against the Niners, by the way, but he made the plays down the stretch. He wins MVP because he's Patrick Mahomes, and that would be his 4th MVP.
They should give it to Creed Humphrey. I'm telling you, give it to the big boys up front. That's what's really going to matter.
Could you imagine? Oh my God.
They should. Wasn't Kyle? Was it this last Super Bowl or was it the 2019 where Kyle Juszczyk had a brief shining moment where he had a chance to be...
Jawan might have been the MVP last year.
Oh, yeah, it was 2019 where he had one touchdown,
right?
And he almost had another touchdown. You're like, oh, my God. Are we going to get a fullback as a Super Bowl MVP?
Jawan might have won it last year if the Niners had won.
Yeah, no, he was outstanding. He was unreal. He was awesome. God.
In terms of like a lesser-known player who might have a big game, maybe this doesn't really qualify because he might be their number one wide receiver. It more so is just Kansas City's lack of wide receivers. I think this is a game for Xavier Worthy to get in the end zone and to have a big game because the way that this Philadelphia defense works is they're going to limit the big plays. They're going to limit the explosives, and they've been trying to use Hollywood Brown as their big play guy down the field since he's come back. I think there's going to be a ton open underneath and in the short intermediate area. They get Xavier Worthy the ball in manufactured ways in space, and you can have him get some yards after catch. So I would be interested in Xavier Worthy if you're looking to put a little money down on something, some Xavier Worthy overs, and maybe an anytime touchdown for him, because ever since they got Hollywood Brown back, I feel like they've had a more defined role for Xavier Worthy, and he's had bigger impacts in the postseason as well. So Xavier Worthy, I think, is going to have a big impact in this one.
That's a great shout. I got another sort of random one for you. Noah Gray. If you want to get into,
that's definitely more random.
Oh, yeah.
Noah Gray is their second tight end, and when you put pressure on Kelsey and you put attention, Noah Gray is just kind of he's not doing it at the level Kelsey is, but he's also just like sitting underneath. He's the Chiefs' second tight end and will just like sort of sit down, Like, you can get him to have like 2 catches at some decent odds. He's a guy out of Duke that I remember watching in the draft, was just sort of shifty, and the Chiefs obviously saw the same thing, and they love dinking and dunking. If you're going to put pressure on Kelsey or try and bracket him or anything like that, you're leaving open Noah Gray, especially on stuff where, it's a delayed release or anything like that.
What about DeAndre Hopkins? Had a long career. Texans, Titans, Cardinals, been working up to this point his entire life, and it feels like his name goes under the radar so much because he hasn't done much, right? He's had kind of a quiet playoffs thus far. But those are kind of the guys that come up big in the Super Bowl. Like, I always think of Plaxico Burress. He had a really good year with the Giants, but that big catch at the very end with the back shoulder fade, I just had a weird feeling. Whether it's Juju Smith-Schuster or DeAndre Hopkins, one of those guys is going to have a touchdown today, and we're going to say, oh, I forgot about him. He still plays?
I like that. It's funny because the Chiefs are... It goes back to like how they're running their offense at this point, where now it's like it doesn't matter who it is. Like, whoever is getting the most advantageous matchup, whoever is getting the right spacing, they're just going to throw it to him. Like, and Mahomes seems to have like a decent amount of trust in all those guys, and the fact that they were able to trade away Tyreek Hill and be like, we're fine, we're going to continue to go on
a three-peat.
Sickening behavior.
DeAndre Hopkins has 1 catch on 3 targets in the postseason so far. So that is
3 touchdown game coming, boys. Okay. Watch out.
Okay. On Philadelphia's side, they've got a couple of great receivers, obviously, in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. I feel pretty confident in saying that I think Dallas Goedert's going to lead the Eagles in receiving yards in this game. I think that we're going to see Steve Spagnuolo try his best to shut down those other 2 wide receivers. I think what it might ultimately mean is that if we're trying to get into the X's and O's and some strategy of it, we talked about this very briefly earlier. I think we might see the Chiefs move Trent McDuffie back to the inside to the slot and maybe match him up one-on-one against Devontae Smith, and then they essentially use 2 and they bracket A.J. Brown for essentially the entire game. It might leave open some Jahan Dotson. I don't know how we feel about Jahan Dotson as a wide receiver.
Jahan Dotson beats you. Jahan Dotson beats
exactly.
you. He's crafty. But
he's crafty. I think the larger beneficiary is going to be Dallas Goedert. There's going to be some openings over the middle, and he generally is pretty good yards after catch as well. So I'm interested and I'm tempted to put something down on Dallas Goedert and his overs because I think he's going to see Spagnuolo, of course, try to limit Saquon, but in the passing game, do his best to take away A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, make someone else beat you. That's somebody else. The next man up is Dallas Goedert.
Do we think we can bet on Tom Brady, how many times he's going to say KB? He's going to be like, great play, KB. Love what they're doing out there, KB. He is... I'm
not that eager to listen to Tom Brady.
He is not good. He is not good, folks. And they keep putting out these media columns. It's like, Tom Brady got better with his little anecdote about Mark Sanchez's butt fumble. It's like, yeah, keep reliving the glory days and screaming at the television like everybody else, Tom. That's great broadcasting, Tom. I'm bitter. I'm from New Jersey. What do you want from me? What do you want? He's not good at this. He's not good at this. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, last year it was on CBS, right? So it was Nance and Romo.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of Romo in the analyst chair either, but
Greg Olsen got done dirty.
Greg Olsen is amazing.
He did.
Yeah. He is amazing.
Yeah, and it's just tough. It's just tough. He's like, because Brady's like simultaneously, and you cut him a little bit of slack because he's trying to do the thing where he's like an owner and he can't be in the production meetings. They said they made an exception for this one. I don't think it's going to make a difference because he just gets too excited and he starts screaming and he doesn't have like a good voice for broadcasting, like which kind of matters when you start yelling a lot and it's just uncomfortable. But we'll see. We'll see. Tom, I'm keeping an open mind, but I have no faith.
Doesn't sound like you're keeping an open mind.
I'm keeping an open mind. I just have no faith.
It's can I hate you less? That's
right.
What this is.
I'll give him credit if he does well. I just don't think he will.
So all three of us picking the Chiefs, huh?
I think so.
Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
So I've thrown this out a couple of times, and I would not be shocked if this were to happen. I don't think I've ever sat down and rooted for the Kansas City Chiefs, this iteration of the Chiefs, to win a postseason game before. I am now going to sit down and watch the Chiefs and root for the Chiefs to win a Super Bowl because that is my hatred for the Eagles. And I would not be shocked if the one time I sit down to root for them is the one time that they ultimately end up losing. So
yeah,
if this happens, you all can blame me. If the Eagles beat the Chiefs, you can blame me, although I think there'll be a lot of you out there who are actually happy about that. But I'm rooting for the Chiefs because I cannot stand the Eagles being
fading the Grandy. Is that what we're doing?
We're fading the Grandy. Fading the
So what
Grandy.
you're saying is we should have rooted against San Francisco last year and we actually would have won.
It
wouldn't have mattered.
Niners are losing that game no matter what. It's just our destiny.
It's brutal. It's brutal. I do think this will be actually it won't. I'm not sure it will be cathartic. I was gonna try and give an optimistic. This will be cathartic. Niners fans get this over with, but it's probably just gonna suck the entire time, and there's no way around it. But then the catharsis happens when the season's over, and you can say, all right, got a new coaching staff.
Yeah, and then
got 9 or 10 draft picks and free agency.
And then we got the drama of Deebo wants to trade, and they got to try to find an agreeable contract for Brock Purdy. Let's go. Yay.
Can't wait.
That's right.
So exciting.
That's right.
Yay!
If Philadelphia wins, then the Dallas Cowboy fans can cry more, which really isn't that bad of a compensation prize, honestly.
I love Jerry Jones.
I don't mind that.
I love Jerry Jones. I think it was today. He's like, yeah, I'm shocked we weren't in this Super Bowl. He's awesome. He's just getting more and more unhinged.
I missed that. Jerry Jones said that?
Yeah, I think it was today. He's like, yeah, we should have made it this year. It's like, yeah, Jerry. Sure, Jerry. How you doing, Jerry?
Cooper Rush, Super Bowl.
Hey, Nick Sorensen, new special teams coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys.
I mean, how about Trey Lance not even being able to get any time with Dak Prescott out? That's not great. It's not great. I remember in training camp where we're like, oh, this guy's got something, and then he tried to run to the outside, and you went, oh no, he does not have the speed for that, and everybody realized it at the same time, and that was a bad time. Remember Trey Lance?
That 4th round pick looking pretty good right now. That's all I'll say. Man,
good value.
Goodness
good value.
gracious.
See if the Niners can get a 4th round pick for Deebo Samuel if they do end up trading him. Because as we've talked a lot about the Super Bowl specifically, we talked about this earlier in the show. We got a couple minutes left with you. Deebo Samuel has requested a trade. The Niners have given Deebo and his agent permission to go out and seek a trade partner. But as you pointed out earlier, Jake, maybe the most likely scenario is Deebo Samuel gets cut because that would be a way the Niners can save a whole lot of money.
Yeah, and as much as money's not the sexiest thing to talk about, and these contracts get complicated, they've started adding these option bonuses just to confuse everybody and make it harder to figure out how much a guy is actually making. And every time you see a new deal, you'll see oh, it's for $300 million, but it's really for half of that. It's nonsense, and I will have none of it. The point is, the 49ers are going to have to pay Deebo a lot of money if they keep him on the roster. He's due $15 million in an option bonus by March 22nd, which is 10 days after the league year starts. So that's kind of a key point for them to make a decision, which again, that's a month and a half away here. So it's going to pick up pretty quickly. I do think they're going to lean towards designating him as a post-June 1st cut. That'll save him $5 million. That's how I think this will go, but who knows? Kyle Shanahan's still really attached to Deebo, and their wide receiving depth isn't great, especially with Ayuk coming back. So it's not the easiest decision either way.
How do we look at that deal that he signs? 3 years, $71 million if it ends with the release this year. It's a big bust, right?
Yeah, it was a huge. I mean, they got really little value out of that. They between that and the Javon Hargrave contract, that's money really poorly spent, and you had to spend it on Deebo. And you simultaneously had this understanding that it might not work because the wheels might just fall off with him because of how physical he has to be and what makes him great, being used basically as a running back and being a wide receiver. It's going to take a toll on your body.
Yeah, you kind of gritted your teeth knowing that the much likelier scenario, rather than that being an incredible bargain, is being an absolutely terrible deal. And that's what it turned out to be for the 49ers. All right, that's all the time we got today. Enjoy the Super Bowl, everybody. It's Niners. Oh, God.
I wish.
It is Eagles and Chiefs. We are hoping that it is Niners and whoever next year at Levi's Stadium. That is what I was hoping that it was, but not this year after it was the case last year. For my guys here, it's Jake Hutchinson. For Sterling Bennett, for Steven Risotto behind the glass. Appreciate all you and everyone for tuning in and contributing to the show as well. My name is Mark Randy signing off. Have a good time at your Super Bowl party wherever you are. Stay safe. Don't drink and drive. We'll talk to you later here on 95.7 The Game.
Get in zone, AutoZone.
Welcome to AutoZone. What are you working on today?
My check engine light's on?
That could hurt your gas mileage. The AutoZone free Fix Finder service can help find the fix for free.
Get in